After the negative reaction to Ghostbusters 2016, the studio decided to change course and make a new sequel that was in continuity with the original films. The result was Ghostbusters Afterlife, and there's plenty to talk about with this one. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, is David.
Hey, remember that summer where we all died under a table?
This is a movie podcast, and that's what the quote you went with, really. I thought I was going to get the fish joke or something, but fair enough.
Here's the problem with this movie. I'm not sure if it's a quote from this movie or the original at any given point.
That one was definitely not in the original, but I get the point you're making.
Yeah.
Yes. Welcome, everyone. We are working through the Ghostbusters movies. We've done the first two. We've done 2016. So that brings us to the fourth movie in the franchise, and this is 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife, the most relevant, of course, before the new movie next week, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And typically the way we plan these out, there's a good chance that this is coming out like the day after Frozen Empire's in theaters. So if you're going to see it this weekend, congratulations. We'll be talking about it next weekend. Have fun. But we are going to talk about Ghostbusters Afterlife today. We'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do. And of course, if you are enjoying the show, please do hit the like button. Helps out a bunch. If you're on YouTube, hit the button. It's easy. It's free. And of course, you can check out everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Me and David do a couple of bonus monthly shows over there. I'll tell you more about those at the end of the show. But this is going to be Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is very much a course correction for the franchise. You know,
What?
Well, they spent all that money in 2016 creating Ghost Corps, the production company, solely for making Ghostbusters movies, which is a very bold thing to do.
Yeah. That's something I realized about Sony, that someone up top just really loves going all in. Like, if you play poker with him, you're going to play exactly one hand, because he's just like, here we go. And you're like, what do you got in your hand? And he's like, a 2 and a 6. And it's like, that's not, what are you doing, Sony?
Yeah, and you can definitely, just once again, you can sort of see the product placement creeping in. There's a scene in this where Paul Rudd's just looking at like a wall of Baskin Robbins flavors, and I'm just like, oh, Sony.
Dude, he literally walks into a Walmart, and everything from the next, 10 minutes, I'm like, wow, did you just, shoot every aisle, and then you saw who would pay you by the end of this?
Yes. I mean, yeah, even the Walmart itself, I suppose, arguably. But at least with that one, I'm like, okay, the scene calls from going into a supermarket. You might as well use a real one. I mean, why not? But
oh, yeah. Absolutely. I love there was a stand, one of those mid-aisle stands. They had the big price signs on top, and one of them had 37 cents for something. I was like, there ain't a goddamn thing in Walmart that costs 37 cents. Stop lying.
A single peanut.
Yeah. They just got a giant tub of peanuts, and they're like, here you go. Plus tax, that's $1.
So yes. So there's a bit of Sony stink on it for sure. It's not. I don't think it's as bad necessarily as the last one, but it's not far off either. It's not the worst I've seen from Sony for sure, but they are notorious for this, so it did stick out a little bit. But yeah, so this is the movie that's actually set in continuity with the original movie. Technically 2 movies, although I think 2 you could argue it did or it didn't happen depending on the dialogue in this movie. But regardless, it's set in continuity. This is meant to be a legacy sequel. It's meant to be this sort of return, a passing of the torch. We've got new characters that are connected to the old characters. We might get a glimpse of the old characters at some point. But this is very much about sort of seeing where the Ghostbusters, or what the idea of that story and where it is now that so many years have passed, so many decades have passed even. The fact that, I mean, the main character, well, arguably it's the kid, I suppose, but the mum, Carrie Coon's character, is Egon's daughter, and she is 40 at this point. So, that's how much time has passed.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I was so unsure whether or not we were going to mark that as a spoiler. Because the movie treats it like it is. The movie spends a long time of just dancing around. Ooh, they're related to somebody, but who is it? Meanwhile, the first shot in the movie practically gives the game away.
I mean, it's not just that. It's everything in the plot indicates that they're connected to Egon, but also the fact that, even the way McKenna Grace, the daughter, right, the young character acts, like she's very much Egon-esque, and like they're not hiding it. Like it's still very much like in your face.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost like in a sort of tribute to Harold Ramis, who of course is the only Ghostbuster who's passed away thus far. It's almost like it was like a tribute to him, that we're going to revolve the entire thing around his character, his legacy, because we can't have him anymore. So we're going to do all that. But anyway, we'll get into all the plot and all the spoilers, and we'll talk about everything broadly and whatnot. But we'll start spoiler free, and we'll just see how our general feelings are. I saw this in theaters at the time. Okay. I waited for the mid-credit scene. I waited all the way for the end credit scene, which I hope you did too.
I did. I did. I'm regretting it, but I did.
So, you hadn't seen this though, so I'm very curious.
Yes.
David, what did you think of Ghostbusters Afterlife?
I'll just be upfront. I didn't hate it. I didn't like outwardly despise it. I'm not as pissed off as I was after 2016. Here's my thing about it. I like the things that make this movie its own. I like how they develop these new characters. They spend some time in this new location. They do some interesting things in terms of like, oh, it's more modern day. How are things going to change in terms of that? I like the stuff that it does when it stands on its own 2 feet. Unfortunately, that equates to about 2.5 minutes of the movie. And then everything else is just, hey, remember we made a movie in the 80s, guys? Here's everything from it. And I don't think that every single one of them, because since we began this season, you've been telling me, Afterlife, it's doing the thing of nostalgia baiting, and it's just a big circle jerk where we're all just remembering how Ghostbusters is this quintessential part of our childhood. I do see that. I understand that. I recognize that. I don't think for the most part I was that pissed off about it. There are a few glaring examples that made me groan, and actually one point I just cursed out the TV for a while, but we'll get to those. But
damn you, Sonny Bravia! Damn you!
Pretty much. It's so frustrating to me because there were a lot of good like concepts they could have rolled with, but it felt to me like they were so scared to do something new and original, probably because of looking at Ghostbusters 2016. They're like, people don't want new. People don't want any of that. We got to go back to everything that's familiar for them. So all we ended up with was that scene in the Millennium Falcon in episode 7 where Ray is talking about how awesome the Millennium Falcon is, but it lasts for 2 hours.
Yeah, I had a lot of feelings about this when I saw it in 2021. And I also agree, I don't hate it. I think it is a very functional movie. It's well enough paced. I think a lot of the new characters are decent enough, although we will be talking about podcasts at some point during the course of this.
You don't like Pocket? You think he misrepresents what we do, Pete?
I just think naming a character called Podcast because he podcasts is really stupid.
That's fair, yeah.
But I mean, no, like even going into this, like obviously everyone likes Paul Rudd. I really like Carrie Coon in general, right? Obviously we talked about her in Gone Girl, but I liked her a lot in The Leftovers. I've liked her whenever she's popped up in something. I think she's a great addition to this. I think McKenna Grace, who plays Phoebe, the daughter, or Egon's granddaughter, if you want to phrase it that way. Yep. She is very good. I've seen her in a number of things. She's been basically one of the go-to kid actors since about 2015. If you look at her IMDb, she's been in like 50 things since then because they keep using her. She's very good, and I think she's good in this. And obviously the son character, Trevor, is Finn Wolfhard, who everyone knows from Stranger Things. So we've got a pretty solid cast, and then there's obviously another couple of characters. You got Lucky, who's the sort of love interest for him, and then Podcast, as we mentioned, who's Phoebe's friend that she makes. But yeah, like I think ultimately it comes down to a few different things. I think comparing it to Ghostbusters as a movie in the same series, it's weird to me, especially watching it so close to those original couple of movies, is that, and this was I mentioned that Tim said this to me when I was talking to him about it, is that it's like they forgot it was supposed to be like just a comedy because this movie isn't really. There's some jokes, there's some funny moments or beats that are there to be funny, but this plays way more like a child's adventure movie of uncovering secrets that And it's like all the things they wanted to take from Ghostbusters are the plot things, it's the props, it's the actual act of being the Ghostbusters, as opposed to what actually made that movie the witty movie that it was. So it's interesting to compare it for that. And then obviously, yes, the nostalgia thing is a big deal. I think the best way I ever heard this described on Twitter is someone posted a photo. I won't say what it is because we're not in spoilers yet, but someone posted a photo from towards the end of this movie, and it was just captioned, "There's such a thing as too much dessert." And that is what this is. And all I could think of is, if you had like one big reference to the original movie and you saved it for like a prominent moment in like early Act 3 when the chips were down, they needed to be inspired, and someone has a moment where there's like a natural reference comes up, it would probably be the most fist pumping that's when you choose to remind us that these are Ghostbusters. Yeah. But instead, the opening scene, even, there's a moment where like some stuff's happening, but there's a moment where a drawer's opened and the hand rummages through like some cutlery and stuff, and out comes the PKE meter, and I'm like, why was it hiding under spoons and shit? It was just so we could have this reveal, because they wanted it to be a little surprise. Like, oh, it's something you recognise. Wave and cheer. You recognise a thing from 40 years ago.
You know what it reminds me of? You know how there was a little, I mean, it's still kind of happening, but there was a little period where on YouTube, people would make like fake trailers for the gritty version of whatever thing you remember from your childhood. Like there was a thing where even before the Power Rangers reboot came out, like there was a thing of like, hey, this is this dark and gritty version of Power Rangers. And people would make these. They have pretty good production value, but it would be just a series of little references, little things where you're just like, I recognize that. I recognize that. That's all the first like act of this movie, arguably 2 acts, is just, I recognize all that. Yeah, that's the things I know.
I would say too, if anything, the first act's a little bit more subdued, because they do at least spend time getting to know the new characters, and then Act 2 goes into reference overdrive, and then Act 3 is just Act 3 from the first movie.
Yeah.
so that's the way the movie pans out. So critiques of this just doing things from the first movie, or having this like reverence where anytime you see something like a proton pack, or dare I say a proton pack turning on where the lights start to flicker and there's close-ups of everything, or anything like that, you know, Paul Rudd, as much as he's likable, his character in this is kind of meant to be an avatar for the audience, because he remembers this from the 80s and thinks it's all really cool. So he's like, oh my god, you got a ghost trap, this is so cool. Like,
that's a pretty good replica. Oh my god, it's not a replica. Oh, like it's, I like him being a nerd for Ghostbusters, but I also think that, I don't know, I think that him as a character, while he is funny and enjoyable, I don't think that it actually gave me any reason to believe that anyone would believe this stuff, you know? Like, I could imagine like a conspiracy theorist or something. We get like a character like that who's like, you know, trying to prove, you know, basically what podcast starts out as in this movie, where he's like saying like, oh yeah, there's all this creepy stuff going on. I believe he would know who the Ghostbusters are, because that's the sort of thing they would just go right down that rabbit hole. But everyone else, I feel like it would be the sort of thing where, hey, remember those like 3 days in New York way back in the 80s where some weird stuff happened? And people would talk about it, but it wouldn't be something that like there's a fan base around anymore.
Yeah. Admittedly, I feel like Ghostbusters 2 can't have happened in this continuity, because there's no way that them walking through New York with the Statue of Liberty would ever be forgotten. Not a chance.
That's the part where they're talking about the first Ghostbusters, and they're like, yeah, no, it's this team, and they did all this stuff, and they blew up a high-rise in Manhattan. I'm like, I'm sorry. That's the thing. They didn't walk the Statue of Liberty down to the middle of New York on New Year's Eve with New York singing along. That wasn't what they were remembering. Okay, sure. It's just Ghostbusters 2 didn't happen.
Yeah, it also maybe explains Egon having a daughter at this age, because Carrie Coon should already be born in Ghostbusters 2. Like, she should already exist.
Someone did the math, because there's much later on, there's little hints of like images from her past with like times and dates to it. Someone did the math, and apparently she should have already been 1 year old in Ghostbusters 1. So time doesn't quite line up there.
Well, if you remember correctly, I said that, you know, Ghostbusters 2 came out the year I was born as a baby and that, and I joked that he'd be the same age as me, give or take. And Carrie Coon's about 8 years older than me, I think. So, that would put her before Ghostbusters. But I can at least buy that. If you tell me, no, she was born in like 2 years after, but it's like Egon wasn't exactly this huge hit with the ladies. Like who's like we know Janine's not the mum, right? We know that much, right? At least it's not implied that she is anyway. It doesn't seem like she is. So.
Egon, did a lot of things with that goo from the second movie that you don't want to know about.
In fact, this was actually a thought I had, which is kind of separate to all the complaints of the nostalgia wanking that the movie does, I was like, I don't think at any point in this whole movie, there's a lot of talk of, Egon abandoned us, so I hate him for that. I hate my father for that. At no point does anyone ever mention the mother. Like, she never says, he abandoned me and my mum, or he left my mother alone to take care of me. She never once mentions that a mother even exists, and I thought that was kind of weird. Like, who's the mother? Like, where was she?
I honestly think... Okay, so this is a problem, and it kind of talks about what the plot of the movie is, but it's vague enough that I'm just going to leave it here. This movie is There was a book that was put out by Harold Ramis's daughter that basically describes how like tense their relationship was, how strained it was as she was growing up. She wasn't exactly a good dad. This is just that. It's just that put in movie form. And in doing so, I think they had a good plot there. If these were characters that we didn't already know, that we didn't have like a basis for, but like everything I know about who Egon is just not in this movie.
Oh yeah.
Like he's a totally different person now.
Yeah, in this movie, even though a lot of what he apparently did is kind of justified, he still comes across as a bit of a dick for the way he did things. And the backstory they kind of hint at and then by the end kind of explain a bit more. It's like, Egon is a dick here for this. Like, there's no two ways around this. He was a dick.
Yeah, but like the way that they explained that he did it, one day he just kind of went off his rocker and just started going crazy about some certain stuff. Like, that doesn't strike me as Egon either. Egon, though I know in the movies, was always the type who would, like, he'd get a little bit weird, but he was never one that didn't sit down and just explain the situation and say, here's what's going on, guys, and just walk you through the whole thing.
Yeah, it's super, super strange. It kind of just has to exist this way because, okay, Harold Ramis has died. We have to revolve a movie, and he has to be the one that's gone because he's passed away. So we have to write a movie around that, and therefore his character just doesn't feel like it fits what we knew about him from before. But
that presupposes the idea that we have to have it be about like the next generation. I don't think they had to do that. I don't think if they made the decision they wanted it to be about like the sons and daughters of the original Ghostbusters, but I don't think they needed to. I think that was a choice that they could have switched away from when they realized that this wasn't quite working as it should have been.
I think a big thing for me as well, on top of all the nostalgia stuff, which I'm sure as we go through it later in spoilers, we're going to point out a lot of things, but is I felt like this didn't need to go big for its third act, and it gets to the point where it's basically just doing the first movie again, and like, you know, the sky's opening up and the entire world's basically at stake, you know. And all I could think was, like, if this was like a smaller story about some kids who found some proton packs and basically discovered there was a ghost somewhere in town, and they made it their own. And maybe this is a bit too Stranger Things, which is maybe why they want to do this, because they've actually cast someone from that show. But I feel like them just having to work together to take on one single ghost and succeeding by the end of the movie, I think would have been a very satisfying. It would have fit what the tone of this movie is, because the tone of this movie is very different from the tone of the original Ghostbusters. Because this is a sentimental movie. This is a movie that plays with the idea of wonder, and it's using a lot of the same cues in the music from the original Ghostbusters, but it's got like emotional versions of it that come in, and nothing was emotional in the original Ghostbusters. It just wasn't that type of movie.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think I didn't even need it to be as small as like they're just dealing with one ghost. I think if they did like a, hey, we have to save our town sort of thing,
sure, I'd
be okay with that. But yeah, once you put it in terms of the world, like, okay, the first two Ghostbusters did save the world. That's fine. They're redoing what they did with the first ones. The problem is it's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Like, there's no change here. You're not identifying yourself as your own independent movie. You're identifying yourself as, hey, the first one, but new.
This comes back to the core problem with all the nostalgia stuff in this, and a lot of these legacy sequels share this, is that this movie on its own does not work. And while there's definitely good sequels that don't work if you haven't seen the original because it is serialized and it does follow one story, this isn't like that. This, even as a sequel, doesn't work on its own as a sequel because fundamentally all it really has is, do you remember how much you love Ghostbusters? We want to remind you of that feeling. All of it is about making you think of the movie that already happened instead of completely, taking on new ideas and doing new things. Like, there was a couple of, like, one of them, there was a big set piece in the middle, which we'll talk about properly in spoilers, but they add, like, a gunner seat to the Ecto 1, and it's actually, like, one of the few interesting new things that are in the movie, because it's like, hey, this actually lends itself to a new type of scene that we never got in the original movies, so fair play.
Yeah, I like the concept of it. I like the way they did it, but I think also in the way that they are telling the story, there is zero justification for this gunner seat to exist. Like, there is absolutely no reason they ever should have added this on. So, hit or miss on that part. But yeah, that's kind of what it comes back to for me, though, is that if you view this through the lens of it wants to do a story that essentially is a parallel of Harold Ramis in real life with his own daughter, I think this is a decent movie. I think that's what I'm talking about when I say when it does stuff independently of Ghostbusters in 1984, it has something to say. It has an interesting plot to it that it really could have dived into and done some cool stuff with. But it just couldn't help itself of spending every possible second it could of going back to the well, of getting stuff from the first movie and saying, like, but don't worry, guys, we're not new. We're not 2016. This is the same thing that you loved before. It's,
what, 80% fan service? And that's the problem, is that it's a movie made to appease fans of a franchise as opposed to trying to actually say something. And I didn't even know about the Harold Ramis daughter thing, but I think part of the problem, even as you're telling me this, I agree that there's maybe something interesting to say there, but like we were getting at with saying this doesn't really fit with Egon in the first movie, or the second movie for that matter either, is that Harold Ramis, he played Egon, but Egon and Harold Ramis aren't the same person. Right. And fundamentally, it sounds like Harold Ramis was a little bit more, at least at times, unlikable than Egon is. And hell, even Bill Murray fell out with them for years, right? They patched things up before he died, which is nice, and he was very heartfelt when he died, and Bill Murray said some nice things about him on stage at the Oscars. It was kind of, everyone was choking up. It was very nice. But it sounds like, he was maybe... I think it sounds, at least from this very small piece of evidence that you've given me and what I've heard here or there, it sounds like he's kind of like one of those auteur type people, right? I'm thinking of like the main character in Close Encounters, who he gets so obsessed with his work and his art that his family kind of suffered as a result because they weren't being paid attention to, they were kind of neglected or whatever. And I'm just concocting that up mostly. But
I haven't read the story. I don't know exactly what the parallels were here on what it was. All I know is that him and his daughter had a very strained relationship, and it was not healthy for her. It's not something where she was happy with that relationship, and I think that maps perfectly onto Carrie Coon's character throughout this movie.
That's not Egon, though. That's the point here, is that just doesn't sound like Egon. And it's funny.
This is someone who only saw the scene where Egon said, "Let's take away the puppy."
It's so funny because I feel like I can already see a comment, like an angry YouTube comment in my head that's saying, you're going to complain about all these things they keep just bringing back from the original film and referencing, and we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing this moment again, we're referencing that line. But you're also complaining that Egon's not Egon. Here's the thing, though. I'm not saying characters can't change a bit between movies, right? That's obviously something that can happen. Look at Sarah Connor, T1 to T2. There's a natural progression there. But the characters still feeling like the characters is one of the things that should still be there. Like, undeniably, because that's not cheap. That's just them being true to who they're supposed to be. In the much the same way we're complaining that the movie doesn't have the same identity of what Ghostbusters had, and maybe that's okay if like, you know, this new era is going to be this more adventure-y type movie because it lines up more with the cartoons and maybe the audience they're trying to capture now. Fine, whatever. I'm not really that fussed about that. I just think it's a worthwhile observation to say, hey, Ghostbusters was this witty, snarky comedy, and this is definitely not that. This is something else.
Yeah, I think that it comes down to the same idea of what makes a good sequel, even if it is immediately afterwards, like Ghostbusters to Ghostbusters 2. Like, the characters more or less remain the same. We get the idea as to who they are in the movies. Obviously, they'll have progression across each of those movies, but they stay... You can see the through line at the very least, but the situations they're in, the things that they come across, those are the things that change. You get different ways of expressing these characters. Because of how this movie is set up, it's just the same things. You run into all the same situations as you did before.
Yeah, and because it isn't really their movie, which is a good thing in a lot of ways, but when you do eventually maybe see some original Ghostbusters, you know, it's kind of this mixture of like one feeling kind of sad because they're so old, it just doesn't feel right. Like, yeah, you know, so there's that part of the problem, but then also because you only get such a short time with them, it also is very much a case of, well, they have to just be these little snapshots of exactly what you remember and how they talk, because we don't have time to do any development with them. Because one of the things we praised about Ghostbusters 2 is that there was actually a really interesting arc for Venkman in that movie. It was like he was growing up in the second movie, and like, for all the faults you might want to levy at that film, there's definitely a few interesting things where they try to take the characters and their stories forward. And
I think the part that really gets me with it in terms of that little snapshot at the end, as you're saying, is that you said earlier, if they just had one big reference, that would have been like the most fist pumping thing. It would have been great. It felt to me like the movie wanted that to be the fist pumping thing, but it had preceded it and followed it with like 40 straight minutes of nothing but other references. Yeah. So it kind of just is like, and here's another.
Yeah. Referencing the original is its main fuel as a movie. And if that's the main thing, and it very much is, and it's a shame because, like I say, I do like a lot of these actors. I actually even like some of the characters and some of the little moments they have between each other. I think Coon and Rudd have chemistry, you know, when they're having their scenes together. You know, there's a lot of little things to like, and I think overall it's still a very functional movie compared to, say, 2016, which was just kind of a really, really bad comedy, right?
Yeah.
This at least, I think, somewhat succeeds at what it's trying to be. I just think what it's trying to be is a little flawed and hollow. Yeah.
In regards to the comedy, obviously we went on and on about what we didn't like about 2016's version, but I think this version, I did like the comedy a lot more. I think it had a better sense of humor. I did notice there was one kind of loop that certain characters were falling into, which is character does weird thing, other character calls them out saying, what are you doing? And the character responds with, I'm doing the weird thing. And then the character's like, oh, cool, awesome. And like, it's just kind of that owning up of like, nah, be weird, be yourself. And that's fine on its own, but they do it like 7+ times over the course of this movie, where it's like, okay, yeah, we get it. That the kids are weird.
Would you say it veers almost a little bit on that, man, I can't believe this crazy thing's happening right now?
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah, I'm sick of that shit. I hate that now. Yeah, there's definitely some modern tropes in that sense with the way it writes its humor. Although I do think the humor that is here does at least work better, because at least it establishes characters and it pays off some things. And
it has punchlines. Yes. They actually end it. The scene begins, they set up a joke, and they end it. That's all I wanted. Thank you.
So yeah, I don't think it's a bad movie, right? I'll say that I don't think it's a bad movie, but I think it's a pretty hollow nostalgia bait kind of thing where if you take out all of that, you sort of realize how little you're left with. And I was really hoping, and I still am, to be fair, although the trailer has not fulfilled me with that much confidence. That the next one, because okay, they've gotten this out the way now. Now they're going to deal with a new threat, it's a new antagonist, all that stuff. That, hey, maybe this will be their chance to just, okay, we've set up these new characters, we can put them on a new adventure, and it can just be its own thing now. But I will say the latest trailer for Frozen Empire was filled with new nostalgia things. So
yeah, I'm doing my best to avoid it, but even as I click on the IMDb page, the first thing I see is Venkman and Winston, and I'm like, shouldn't we be focusing on our new characters, guys? You did your Force Awakens. You can move on to your Last Jedi. Actually, never mind. Stop that. Don't do that.
So, yeah. All right, anything you want to bring up before we get to spoilies?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure everything I wanted to say is pretty much there. I think the only other thing is that this movie was, I think, faithful to like the canon of it, as we were saying before. I think it did a good job of fitting into the world of what like Ghostbusters set up. It didn't introduce any new like lore or anything like that. But as we did say, Ghostbusters 2 kind of just is ignored. Like it doesn't really come up at any point. It's not outright like told like, but that didn't happen. It's just kind of blanked over.
Yeah.
But I do love this trivia bit here, which is basically fans were reaching out to Jason Reitman saying like, hey, what happened to Ghostbusters 2, man? And Jason Reitman responded with like, well, you know, it's not out of canon. There's potential that, and this was back when the movie first came out, so obviously things have changed, but he's like, there's potential that in the sequel, we can go back and we can deal with, I'm blanking on his name now, but
Vigo.
The guy in the painting. Yeah, Vigo. We can go back and deal with Vigo and all the goo. And just reading that trivia bit as soon as I finished the movie, I was like, you still don't get it. Like, we don't need to go back to that.
Yeah.
We just wanted you to say it happened.
Yeah, I think something you said there is that it adheres to the canon, and I agree with that. It adheres to the canon, but not the character of the movie. Mm-hmm. I don't mean the characters in the movie. I mean the character of. I mean, movie, obviously some of the characters we were mentioning Egon, but overall, I mean the character of the movie. So
it's kind of like those MCU things, like more modern and stuff like that. Especially once like She-Hulk came out, where they post a picture of like people getting dusted or whatever, and then it's next to the scene of the She-Hulk like twerking or whatever, and they're like, can you believe these are part of the same cinematic universe? It's kind of got that sort of vibe where you look at the original Ghostbusters and you compare it to like this heartfelt emotional scenes in this, and you're like, can you believe that these are part of the same universe?
Yeah. So spoilers then, you've been warned for Ghostbusters Afterlife. We're going to get into it. The opening of this movie, which is Egon on his own. You get this sort of extended intro where they always hide his face, of course. He's in silhouette or he's just off camera. There is a couple of moments where he's in kind of shadow where I think they are still CGing the face so you can kind of see him, but not quite.
I'm not sure exactly on that. They give him a beard. They give him a big beard. You can see it. But I think the thing that makes you realize it's Egon is that his round glasses reflect the light, and you're like, okay, that's Egon. Even if we're not supposed to know it is, that's Egon.
But you get that he is like a lone Ghostbuster because like you see like a one beam of a proton pack like going into the sky, and it's like, okay, there's just one last final Ghostbuster, and he's in a bit of a car chase, and he's luring a ghost back to his farmhouse. He's got one in a trap, and he wants whatever's chasing him to go step into his like sort of farmland, which we find out later is actually just a series of traps, but it doesn't take the bait. So ultimately he goes in.
Well, actually, it does take the bait, but his traps fail.
Oh, yeah, like, not enough power, right?
Yeah, he triggers it and just the power gives out.
But the ghost gets him, right? The ghost kills him, effectively. Which, for the record, was there ever a threat in any of the previous movies of a ghost actually murdering someone?
Well, I guess it depends on your definition of murder, because we actually see in one of the very first like references to the original, if you ignore the PK meter in the traps, is that it uses the hands coming out of the couch to grab Egon and seemingly kill him. So that's obviously Zool. We're just doing Zool, but yeah, maybe it would have killed Dana if they didn't end up stopping things.
Is it not Gozar? Isn't Zool one of the...
No, Gozar is the god. Zool and Vinz Clothar are the dogs.
Okay. Just mixing up my lore, yes, which this movie's very concerned with.
Yes.
I love how Evil Shandor is mentioned in one scene in the original movie, but here, like, right from the opening scene, there's a sign saying, Shandor Mines, or whatever it is.
Yeah. The moment that came up, I'm like, oh, okay, I know what we're doing here, guys. All right, glad we had it.
Yes.
I'll be totally honest with you. I would have been insufferable to watch this movie with, because every time something came up, I was like 2 minutes early to the punch. I was like, they're going to do this next. And then 2 minutes later, there it is. And it was all the time.
So we're introduced to our main family of characters. Callie is Carrie's character, which is confusing. But she is a single mom with her 2 kids, and they were being evicted from their apartment. This sets up that the daughter, Phoebe, is good with gadgets and technology. She's like made a hole in the wall and she's tinkering with the electricity. There's some banter between her and her teenage son, Trevor, who's getting his hair cut. It gives you a sense of who they all are.
They're not a typical, like, you know, Reagan era sort of family. They're dysfunctional. They're modern age. They're the modern family, more or less.
Yeah, but she gets evicted. She does mention that, like, her father's just died and left her some stuff, like a farmhouse, and they're going to go deal with that. But because they're getting evicted, it turns out to not just be, oh, we're going to go there for a week and check out what he's left is. It's now,
like, sell the land.
Yeah, now we're going there and living there because we have nowhere else to live. So we're going to this small farm town in Oklahoma, I think they said. So, yeah, we get them moving there. They drive cross country. Get a little montage. Not much to it, really. But, yeah, I mean, the first big cameo, obviously, is Janine, who kind of shows up as kind of like the executor of Egon's estate.
Yeah, they go into the house, and they immediately, like, this place is run down. It's horrible looking.
Hey, David. Did you notice the stack of books?
So that was the first time I got pissed. That was the first time. Because here's the thing, I don't get pissed when, like, the PKE mirror comes out. I don't get pissed when the trap comes out, because, yeah, those are things in the movie that, like, it would make sense that they come across. I'm cool with that.
The way they brought them out can piss me off, because the way they sort of do it is if, like, hey, it's a magical moment because you recognize this thing. But
yeah, but this one in particular pissed me off because it took a moment from the original movie without realizing why it was a moment in the original movie. In that movie, the books were stacked that way because it was a librarian ghost. That was the thing. It likes books. So to then say Egon in his own home as a ghost, which, by the way, that's obvious that's happening almost immediately, to say he's also stacking books like that.
A couple of scenes of this, at least. Maybe not quite this scene yet. I mean, admittedly, it's probably the most predictable thing in the world, though, that the dead Ghostbuster is going to be a ghost in the next movie. Like, that's just obvious.
I think it's obvious before that, because there's the scene where he gets grabbed by the hands or whatever out of the couch, and the PK meter goes dead, but then it starts up again, like indicating, like, oh, he died, but he's still here.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that was the first part where I just groaned. I was like, okay, here we go. All the references on parade.
Yeah, they're looking around, and it's a slower start. It's them getting used to the house, and you know, I won't go through, like, all that stuff in order. We'll talk about them going interacting with others soon. I think they go for a burger that night, and that's how Trevor sees the girl of his dreams named Lucky, who works at the burger place, and he tries to go in and apply for a job, and they make fun of him a little bit for it.
You know, maybe I just lost my childlike sense of, like, romance and wonder, but, like, nothing in this scene seems like they are a good couple together. Like, I don't get it. I have no idea what he is like. Wow, she's so incredibly beautiful. It's like, dude, she's a bitch the first time you talk to her. Like, 100%.
Yeah, he also lies about his age and says he's 17 here. We later find out that he's actually 15, which is a bit of a shock to her.
Meanwhile, Finn Wolfhard, I think, is like 21.
I mean,
like,
now, when they shot this, he was probably like 18 or something like that. But
yeah, fair
enough. Yeah. Things have moved a long way since Stranger Things season 1, where he was like 12.
In my head, he's still there.
So, but that just sets up a couple other characters, and the idea that everyone thinks that Egon was this crazy guy because they all call him the dirt farmer because he sort of, like, he didn't plant anything. He sort of maintained a field but full of dirt, but he never actually had any crops or grew anything or did anything, so they all call him the dirt farmer. So, yeah, but the main thing that's set up early on at the home stuff anyway, I'm going to go all about order here just to keep this straight in my head, but it's basically that the ghost of Egon starts interacting with Phoebe, and starts pointing lights around, starts moving chess pieces, to the point where he just straight up plays chess with her, and she's sort of tentatively moving things around and like taking it in. But that's kind of how that all starts to develop. But I think some of that is after, though. We do get all their sort of like interactions with all the other new characters, which is and this is the least reference heavy part of the movie, because it is all just introducing new things.
So this is the part that gets me, though, because it doesn't have anything to do with like how it's referencing stuff, but it's just kind of weird writing for me, is that they explicitly say it's the summer. Like they straight up say, hey, we're going to this place, we're going to be spending the whole summer there at minimum. But then they also want to do a school plot. They want to send Phoebe to school. So they say that she's in summer school for some reason, but like, why? Why would they send a super smart child to summer school? I
think the implication is that she would like to keep learning stuff because she's a super nerd. However, clearly this is just a punishment for kids who were bad during the year.
Right.
Hence why their teacher, who's doing this, Paul Rudd, just shows them Cujo and Child's Play in class. And that's it. Which is very disappointing to Phoebe because she wanted to learn more things. So she ends up snooping around him and noticing that he's studying all these earthquakes that are happening. Which, by the way, is Oklahoma an earthquake place in general?
It is not an earthquake place.
Yeah, I don't think so.
They bring up this idea of fracking, which is something to do with getting oil out of the ground, despite the fact that it's not in like big pools, and it can cause earthquakes, but no, it's not on any fault lines or anything like that.
Yeah, okay. I didn't think so. It seemed pretty inland, I guess. Not that earthquakes have to be at the edge, but you know what I mean.
I mean, pretty much though. In terms of the U.S., you got earthquakes in like California area, and then a couple on the East Coast, but mostly California area.
So they're introduced to him, and Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon kind of have a bit of chemistry immediately, because she kind of like says, "Oh, can you imagine what loser they've got teaching summer school here?" Like, yeah, me.
How's it going? I'm Paul Rudd.
So
he does just feel like Paul Rudd throughout this movie. It doesn't really feel like a character, but
he's just Paul Rudd.
It works. Yeah. It works. And then we get introduced to your favorite character, Pete.
Podcast, who walks around with like a Rhodes style like boom mic without a boom. He's just holding like a gun, right? It's like a little shotgun mic, and he just points it at people. He's got his headphones. He's got his little mixer recorder, and he's asking questions. And there's no like real sense of like, because he even admits that, it's mostly about mysteries and conspiracy theories, but sometimes I'll review restaurants, or I'll do other things, and I'm like, so there's no sense to what your show actually is then. The only thing we know about
really finds its voice at episode 46.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the only definitive thing we know about this guy's podcast, is that he thinks it gets good at 46. That's it.
What are we on now? Episode like 75 or something of this show?
When do you think we'll find our voice?
I hope it's soon. I hope we get there.
Oh dear. But he ends up palling around with Phoebe, and Phoebe even tells a couple of her really bad jokes, which he actually gets a little bit of a kick out of. Yeah,
can we just talk for a second about the dynamic of the mother and Phoebe? Where I get it. Not everybody has to be like super loving, caring parents. It doesn't seem like Carrie Coon's character had the best parents like situation growing up, obviously. So therefore she may not be the best parent herself. I'm fine with that characterization, but the fact that she literally tells her kid, because Phoebe's very awkward and socially weird around people, she literally tells her kid, "Don't be yourself." I feel like that's damaging. I'm just going to put that. I feel like that's not a good thing to...
I'm okay with that, because to me, that's almost the closest thing to the type of snipey comedy that was in the original. And I think it works because... I think it works because Phoebe gets to throw it back at her later when she's going on the date, and she's like, "Don't be yourself." And the way Carrie Coon turns and looks at her like, "You little shit, how dare you throw that back in my face," I think justifies its inclusion.
Oh, yeah, no, I really like it being there for a comedy's sake. I think it's one of those, like, again, it feels like the original movie. I just think viewing it from the viewpoint of like, you're raising your kid, it's like you're not turning out much better than your dad at this point if that's the way you're treating your kids.
I'm a fan of mistreating children in movies. Okay, whether that's verbal abuse, physical abuse.
Mm-hmm. Why are you not into Star Wars Episode 3 then? I don't get it.
Ellie, one scene in Star Wars Episode 3.
Just put that on loop for the full hour and 45. Got it.
Yes. Yes, younglings. What a stupid word. Anyway, so yeah, she ends up walking home with Podcast and gets to know him a little bit, and they've kind of befriended each other. He's like, "Oh, you're at this place, the dirt farmer's house. Wild, okay." So it sets up these various things. It sets up that Trevor is doing all the crappy jobs at the burger place because he's basically just like, okay, which makes me wonder who the manager is that they've actually hired him to do it. Because I get why Lucky and all of her friends that work there all are getting some amusement out of him doing all the crappy, like, scrubbing under the fridge jobs and whatever else he's doing. I think one of them is he's in the freezer doing inventory of the burgers, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure you could take them out of the freezer to do the inventory, but no one suggested that, apparently.
I was 100% waiting for it to be like, dude, we were kidding. You don't have to count the burgers. You just count the number of boxes the burgers are in. What the hell's wrong with you?
So, yeah, I mean, all of this is perfectly fine. It's setting up the characters and the dynamics.
Yeah.
But it's really, things kick off that night, though, because Phoebe gets sort of, like, directed by Egon the ghost. You don't see him. It's worth mentioning that for all of this stuff, it is just pointing lights, it's flickering lights, it's, you know, a moving object, it's just sort of directing where she should go. Obviously, we're in spoilers, we can say you eventually see him right at the very end, but that's you know, something they save for later. So, yeah, he's got a secret bunker, a basement, with all of his gadgets and tech.
Second groan. The fact that they somehow managed to introduce the fire pole, despite the fact of how would he get back up? Like, why would he just show me stairs, man?
I presume that there is another exit, okay? There has to be.
I would hope so, yeah.
What made me groan more is that she goes over to his overalls and looks in the pocket, and what does she find in there? She finds a crunch bar. Because remember that scene in the original where Venkman gave him a crunch bar?
I'm realizing now I just dislike this whole scene.
Some say it's the exact same crunch bar that he just forgot to eat.
I think it is. I think it probably... No, he ate it. It's empty. He just stuck the wrapper in there and never took it out over his many years of ghost busting.
I mean, realistically, it can't be because they didn't even have the suits yet when he gave him the crunch bar, but still.
Oh, that's right.
That was
so
before.
That makes even less sense.
No, I mean, I think it's more believable. It's not this. I think the implication is he just really likes crunch bars.
Yeah, probably.
So he's had more than one in his time.
It's that same sort of thing of the movies, the 80s movies, never said he liked crunch bars. We just see him get a crunch bar at one point, and that's enough to apply it to his whole character.
Hey, he also likes Twinkies.
Oh, I know.
Because there's one in the glove box of the Ecto 1.
That was cursing period number 1. That was the point where I was like, because he didn't like Twinkies. He didn't say he liked Twinkies. That wasn't the thing. He just said, imagine this Twinkie. Doesn't say he ate it. Doesn't say he liked it. He just had a Twinkie there.
Yeah, that's like the crunch bar. At least you can imply that because Venkman gives him one, that it's a treat. So maybe he does like them. But the Twinkie was just an incidental thing that was sitting around for him to make like, I love that scene. Like, what about the Twinkie is one of the funniest lines in that original movie. But it's not some big deal that you can just throw in a Twinkie and have it mean something.
Oh, God. Like, there were so many things that I kept thinking, like, this is the dice in the Millennium Falcon moment. This is the thing where they, like, pull something out of nothing and make it a thing, but they just kept doing it over and over again to the point where all of it's dice.
For sure. So, yeah, obviously she sees the proton pack. The ghost helps her fix it up. She just recognizes that a couple of bits are missing from it. I guess it's just built like other things that are electronic.
Yeah. You know, if you look on the back of your refrigerator, it's just a proton pack just sitting there. That's all it is.
Oh, dear. Okay, fine. And meanwhile, during some of the stuff with Horn Podcast, we also see that Trevor he finds the car, he finds the Ecto 1, he starts fixing it up for himself, right? Which I was okay with this, because this didn't treat it too much like I mean, the first time you see it under the sheet, it's a bit of like dun-dun-dun, like, magical moment. But for the most part, him just saying, hey, there's a free car in here, I'm going to fix it up. Like, that made sense to me. That was fine.
Yeah, it was a problem for me where his vocals, the words that were being said when we look at the car for the first time, is he literally says, what a shitbox. And I'm like, all right, vocally, the words you're saying, that's the tone I want out of it, because this isn't something that the character for any reason should have reverence for.
Yes.
But the visual style, the way like the camera is treating the car,
I agree completely.
Yeah. It's 100% like,
it's my problem with every single prop they bring back from the first movie is they treat it visually like it's the most important thing you've ever seen. Like, that's the way the camera looks at everything from the original movie. Well, including the Twinkie.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so she is messing around with this stuff, which leads us to her out in a field with podcast, and she's got the proton pack. She's got it hooked up. They've set up a little, row of tin cans and whatnot as if she's going to target practice. And she puts on the proton pack, and like I said earlier, you get all the close-ups of all the lights coming on and where the switch is, and it really feels like, oh, we're going to really give those Ghostbusters freaks what they want.
Yeah, I love how in the original movie it was like, all right, flip on the pack itself, you got one switch, and then flip on the, I don't know what you call it, the handle, the jet, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's also one switch, but this one, they take the time to show exactly where the switch is on the proton pack, and they flip it ever so slowly. And then on the handle, there's 3 separate switches she has to put on slowly to get that hum coming up. And I'm like,
it's way more satisfying in all science fiction, especially when it's like a pilot in a ship. If they go, do. If they do it 3, you have to do 3 switches. It makes it feel like they're doing something important because there was 3 switches.
Don't get me wrong. They get that. I understand that. That's the whole reason they did it. But it's another one of those things where it's like, when they flipped on their handlebars before, they just did it.
Yeah.
It wasn't a whole listen to that baby hum.
The only detail that I kind of like seeing here that we didn't see before is that there's a shot of the circular part, and you can actually almost see like the nuclear reactor inside going. And I thought that was an interesting thing to see, because it kind of points out just how stupidly dangerous it is that someone runs around with this thing. Never mind a 12-year-old kid who's just going to start firing it in a field willy-nilly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's something I'll always accept. Like the transitions between like Star Wars or even like Doctor Who or stuff like that is, I'm okay with you updating things that technically should be the exact same thing with better effects, just because it's better to look at. I'm all right with that.
Yeah, but she turns it on. Obviously, instead of hitting one of the cans, she burns the entire log that the cans are on, because it's a proton pack. But
I love at this point, as soon as they're done with it, they look like they hear a noise, and there's some steel mill next to them or something like that, and they hear a noise. And I love Podcast. This entire time in the movie, he's been all up on ghosts. We've already gotten the entire trap release scene with Gruberson, which we'll get back to.
Oh yeah, that happened first. You're right. Okay, I forgot about that.
Yeah. But they're looking around at this whole steel mill thing, and despite the fact Podcast is 100% on ghosts, he's like, that's probably just a pigeon. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right, sure it is, buddy.
Yeah, we'll come back to this thing. Yeah, I didn't realize I assumed that came after, but you're right. Yeah, basically because she finds the trap and she shows it to Podcast, and they've got it in at the school. That's when Paul Rudd, that's Gruberson. He's Gary Gruberson. He recognizes it and starts talking to them about it. He shows them some YouTube videos of various news clips from the 80s showing the Ghostbusters. Later on, Phoebe's watching the advert from the TV commercial, on YouTube. So it really sets up that she's learning about who her grandfather was and what the Ghostbusters were and all the rest of it. Meanwhile, Trevor's stuff in all of this is that he goes out to the mountain with Lucky and her friends, and they have this kind of moment where they're in the little dongle
elevator?
car elevator, whatever you want to call it, that goes into the mine. And they're just having a romantic moment, talking about whatever. But then there's growling underneath, and you can see the ghosts forming and circling. And there's one looks quite demonic and says Zul, and
one says Gozar.
Says Gozar. Sorry, in my head they're interchangeable. They're just.
Oh no, I get it. I get it. But I was waiting so long in this movie to just hear Zul, and they just kept cock blocking me. I was like, come on, give it to me.
So he's seen something spooky. That's important because he's going to like intervene soon with the other kids. But yeah, back to them testing the proton pack. They hear some noises. They go into this like old factory or whatever it is, and they find a ghost. And don't get me wrong, like yeah, you can say this is just this movie's Slimer, but I will say at least it's not just Slimer. They came up with a name. It's Munchy or Muncher, and it has like at least one little bit of purpose later on. They use it for something which felt like, okay, you know what, you set that up, you paid it off later on, that's fine.
Yeah.
But this is the ghost that she tries to like zap it, and she actually does. She ends up like capturing it with the beam, and she's holding it. And she's like, come on, podcast, get the trap out. And he tries to roll the trap in, and it just flips over. He's like, oh, I need to pull it back in now and try and roll it out again. So we see the ghost kind of like pull the beam off of itself, which I was actually okay with this. This was something we never really saw in the original movies, but I kind of... The idea that it's not like a permanent hold once it's on, and we see later on Gozar's even more powerful because she can take off like 3 beams at the same time. I'm like, okay, this is fine to establish. I'm okay with that.
Didn't they fire their beams at Gozer and like she just kind of like swatted them away or like batted them away in the original movie?
Yeah,
and that's why they had to come up with the crossing the beams thing.
Oh, for sure, but you never got like this visual of it, of like them being around her and her like just pulling them away. Like this is obviously something that visual effects of today are letting them show it in a more interesting way.
That's actually something I really wanted to talk about, and I'm glad you brought it up. The visual effects here. So there's this thing that they do, especially with the traps, and later on as we get more ghosts, we see it with them, where they do like this little electrified effect on them. They show like a little, like, I guess I'll call it like a wave of static electricity or something on them.
Yeah, sure.
It's really 80s. It's like purposely not as high definition or quality as it probably like would be with total modern effects, but I really like it because of that. Sure. Like it just is that tiny little throwback back to that sort of era of special effects.
No, it's a nice touch. I agree. So the ghost gets away because the ghost's whole thing, of course, is that it chews through metal. It eats metal and it bites through a bunch of stuff, but it also fires the metal back out like a hail of bullets, where it'll open its mouth. And I'm like, okay, this is fun. I'm also again realizing how dangerous this is for these 2 kids. Like they could literally be torn apart as if they're in World War II here. But
no, they should be killed. Absolutely, no doubt.
But they're ducking and hiding. I'm like, okay, this is all fine. Because this middle section is one of the better parts, which is as much as it's coincidental that just after testing the proton pack, there's a ghost in the building right next to them. You know, fair enough. Like, roll your eyes at that, and you can kind of justify it by saying, well, in the original movie, when Gozar was sort of ramping up to come out and all that, all the ghost activity was going up in the area around the city. So, okay, fine. But anyway.
Yeah, I'll accept it.
They chase it out of the building, it goes away, and this is just happens to be the same time that Trevor's got the Ecto-1 working, although little help from Egon, I think, is implied right at the very end, because it's not starting, and you just see like a little spark push a cable back in place, and it's like, oh, now it's working. Oh, I wonder who helped him with that. So Trevor comes darting around, he's driving through the fields, which, this is actually the thing, because this is the first poster I think this movie had, was just the Ecto-1 driving through a cornfield.
I don't know if it was the poster or the first trailer, like one of the main shots from that was that sort of thing. But yeah, I definitely remember that. Yeah,
there was a lot of that going on. But he runs into the 2 kids, and they're like, hey, there's a ghost, let's go. And we find out that Trevor doesn't have a license, he's failed his test twice. But at least he's, you know, he would technically he knows how to drive, he's just not legally allowed to yet.
This is all bureaucratic bullshit. Don't worry about it.
But to be fair, like I actually quite enjoy this sequence for the most part, because it is just okay. You can sort of forget all the nostalgia bullshit, and it's just like, okay, we've got the Ecto-1 in a car chase with a ghost. They're driving through this small town. She's on the gunner seat, which, you know, she doesn't realize she's on a gunner seat. She accidentally like turns it on and it flips her out, and she's like, you know, and there's a lot of close calls where, you know, the brother's driving and she almost hits into something. But you've got this kid firing a proton pack going down the main street of this town and hitting various things, causing damage left and right. But they ultimately get the ghost. It just so happens, though, that after they've got the ghost, they get arrested quite quickly because they're driving without a license and also causing so much goddamn damage.
Yeah. And again, this whole sequence here, I really appreciate it. I really like it because it is the movie doing its own thing. Sure, it's using props and stuff from the original, but that's fine. You can use the props. I don't have a problem with that. It's the exact same situations just being wholesale lifted that I have a problem with. This situation here is meant to be the kind of parallel to the hotel of the original, but it's so wildly different, wildly its own, that it's fine.
Own unique thing that those movies never did, and feels like it's doing something different with it. And you've even got like a trap on like a remote control truck kind of thing that Podcast is driving around, which it's a bit cutesy maybe, but again, I get it. It works. I noticed in the trailer for the new one, they're sort of like evolving that into a drone with a trap on it. So we'll see how that goes in the next one. But
I mean, it's one of those things that it makes sense that they would at least use new technology with it, because obviously if you have, like, they showed it off in the first scene. He throws in the trap, it falls onto its side. Well, you're out of luck. Tough luck there, buddy. But you use this new tech. If we've got like really cheap RC cars and drones now, you can just make that work for you. So yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, Callie and Gooberson are on a date. Which we never actually see them ask. We just, when he drops them off after the whole, when they open the trap at the school, right? It ends up like, a shockwave comes out and like smashes like all the car windows and stuff, and he's like,
well, it's Vince Clortho, one of the demon dogs, was trapped in there, so he gets escaped and he goes back to the mountain. Oh, we didn't even talk about the mountain thing.
Well, we talked about the kids being up there.
Yeah, the older kids, but like when Podcast brings her in and gives her the lore dump.
I forgot they went to the... Okay, yeah.
Yeah, there's this carvings in the wall, and like Podcast is saying like, oh, nobody knows where it came from, but there was this mining town here, and there was this guy who ran it. Yeah. You may have heard of his name.
Evil Chandler built this entire town.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
And then one by one, all the miners started like dying or whatever, and so all that's left are these carvings, and you, as the audience, you see it's clearly Gozer and the two demon dogs up on these carvings.
For sure. So, yeah, so you don't see them actually ask each other out in a date, but you see them have chemistry, because he drives the kids home after the whole trap incident, and they kind of hit it off, this chemistry. And Podcast even points out, I think Mr. Gooberson's trying to bone your mum. To which she says, oh, I don't show my emotions like everyone else does. On the inside, I'm vomiting, but she's very calm and collected. So, but no, we see them on the date, and they're bantering, they're having some jokes. She's talking about how she wishes Phoebe would like open up a bit more, get in trouble, and he's like, there'll be time for that. Maybe she'll take up pole dancing. Like, I don't think she's got the dexterity for that. I don't think it matters. Like, genuinely funny exchange. That was a genuinely funny exchange.
Yeah, no, I actually really like the characterization here, where Gruberson is very much, he's a scientist. He's studying these. The whole reason he's in town is that he's studying these earthquakes that are happening in town, and he's trying to figure out what's causing them. Is
that why he's here? I thought he just lived here, and then he just happens to have an interest. So when it started happening,
I mean, maybe the way I picked it up was that I thought I remembered him saying something like, 5 years ago this happened, and he's just been researching it since. But yeah, maybe he's been there beforehand as well. But no, either way, regardless, he's got this love for science. He really enjoys it deep down. And then because of the way Egon gave up his family for science, Callie hates it. Like, she lets her daughter do it, but she has zero interest in it whatsoever.
Yeah, she's not controlling with it or anything, but yeah, she has no interest herself.
But yeah, so you see these two basically trying to find the common ground within that, and it's nice. I think, like you said, they have good chemistry. It really works for them.
Yeah, they have chemistry. The common ground ends up being that they're both good with their kids, basically. Like, she's like, hey,
pretty much.
They start talking about that and whatever. Of course, once they're arrested, though, they have to go to the police station to pick them up, which, obviously, I'm skipping ahead here. There's some important things here. First of all, obviously, a big exposition scene in the original was when they were in a jail cell, so I don't know if they were trying to maybe mimic that a little bit here.
Oh, absolutely.
But, so they're sitting in the jail cell after being arrested for driving recklessly without a license, and Lucky shows up, like, in the other cell, and Trevor's like, oh my god, you get arrested too? And she sort of, like, plays it up like she has been, But then it turns out the sheriff's just her dad, and she's just waiting for a lift home.
she does a great bit here. She's like, yeah, no, and I got some stuff on me. I really need you to hide. And he's like, yeah, sure, anything. Let me have it. I'll do it.
Of course, though. And I like the actor who plays the sheriff. He was on season 2 of Fargo. I thought he was good in that.
Okay.
But, so they're talking about Shandor, and they're talking about other things going on in the town and what they should do. Like, they're not even concerned with the fact that they've been arrested. They're just so... Now, at this point, they know there's a ghost, and they're so fixated on dealing with it that they're just concerned about that. But when the sheriff comes in, McKenna Grace, Phoebe, turns around and says, hey, don't we get a phone call? The camera tracks into his face as he says, yeah, you get a phone call. Who you gonna call? For the audio listeners, David has taken off his headphones and he has vacated the room. He is... He's returning, dear listeners, don't worry. Everything's okay, I think. Okay, there we go.
I stopped the movie. I was not okay.
Yeah. Look, it's forced. It made me roll my eyes. Look, if I'm going to give it a teensy-weensy little bit of credit, and I do mean teensy because I still don't like it, the one positive is that she does literally call the Ghostbusters.
That makes it worse for me. That makes it so much worse for me.
I at least understand like what they're trying to do with it, but it's just so cheesy when he says who you gotta call that I can't help but like feel like, oh, like what are you doing, movie?
Look, everything within this, like the moment he says who you gonna call up until the phone actually like rings and we see who's on the other end, I hate all of that because A, we're just taking like, oh yeah, he knows Ray Parker Jr. exists now in this universe. Sure, why not? Let's go for it. So he says, who are you going to call? She actually literally calls the Ghostbusters, which makes it all the more
You took this as him making an intentional reference to the song?
No, I didn't.
Okay, right.
I didn't. I was just saying that. I'm saying that it's such a massive, wild coincidence now that he said that line and she was actually going to now call the Ghostbusters. The next part is that she... somehow on a piece of paper has written down this Ghostbusters number because you see her looking at it as she's typing it out. And then on top of all of that, the fact that the Ghostbusters number is still active.
No, I agree. I did have this thought that it's wild that it's still active and it's been redirected to Ray's bookstore as a cult bookstore. That is a bit of a stretch. I don't think it's impossible, but
I'd be okay with it redirecting to his store if he was like cool with people calling up saying, hey, is this the Ghostbusters? But at the moment that she brings up, hey, aren't you a Ghostbuster? He's like, goodbye, and is about to hang up again. So why did he redirect the number if he didn't want people calling the Ghostbusters?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. But he's very unkind about Egon, and then she says, he died last week, and he's like, oh, well, okay, maybe I was a bit harsh when I said he can go to hell. maybe I should calm down a little bit.
I really wanted him to double down in the scene, though. He's like, if Egon Spengler can go to hell, he died. I stand by it.
But she tries to explain that there's ghosts, of course. She doesn't get very far, though, because eventually the sheriff like hangs up the phone for her and says she's out of time.
She doesn't even like explain that there's ghosts or anything. All she does is say like, what happened? And then just lets Ray go off on a monologue of like, we were... Go ahead. Yeah.
There is a hint, though, by the end. There's a reason why he feels motivated to come and help later on. There's a hint.
Absolutely. But like the whole of the conversation exists purely for the fact of what happened to get Egon to this point. And Ray explains that after Ghostbusters, theoretically 2, because they don't ever actually say it, they didn't have any more ghosts showing up. They got themselves out of a job again. And then Egon managed to get convinced that the end of the world was coming. And so he stole all of the Ghostbusters stuff and moved out to that farm in Oklahoma. And that managed to piss off everybody. So now Ray's working in the bookstore. Peter is a professor in marketing and advertising, which that's great. That's
perfect. Yeah,
that's perfect for him. And Winston is businessman.
Successful.
What kind of business? Successful business.
Yeah, but she subtly just starts to like get out that there's something going on when the sheriff hangs up the phone. So Ray's like concerned by what he's heard. She also tells him that she's Egon's granddaughter, which does make him pause for a second as well. So that's obviously just there to set up why the original Ghostbusters are going to like make their big entrance later on.
It does definitely feel to me that they wrote this script with that scene there, but you can easily cut it out if they didn't get the Ghostbusters back. Like you easily could just make her say, you know, she doesn't say that she got the phone call or anything like that. Like they just immediately remove that, lift it out, and they wouldn't have to reference the old Ghostbusters at all.
Yeah, maybe. So, yeah, obviously Callie is pissed when she comes to the station. Well, at first she's like, "Why the hell did you arrest my kids?" And then they explain what he did, and she's like, "Actually, okay, yeah, I'm actually pissed at him now."
It's like, oh, they just went joyriding. It's like, yeah, they stole a car, so be it. But they also destroyed our main street. And he's like, I was unaware.
So, yeah, she's pretty pissed. She takes them home.
The police are keeping every one of the, like the Ecto one, the proton packs, all that's in compound lockup.
So it's all been kept by the police there, and the kids aren't happy about it, but they don't really have much say.
Dude, she tries to pull the proton pack on the sheriff.
Yeah, Phoebe, that is. Yeah, she aims the proton pack at the sheriff, and Carrie Coon has to jump in and like grab it out of her hand and goes, "She was kidding. She didn't mean it." Like, see,
this is one of those little character beats that I actually think works really well because it goes back to the scene from the original where when Walter Peck is trying to shut down the grid. I'm pretty sure I remember Egon also getting in the way of like trying to stop him, and he's like threatening him pretty much. So I guess that's something that she picked up through genes. It's the first time in any Ghostbusters movie where one of them has at least implied a threat to just blast a proton pack at a human being, and I kind of love it was a 12-year-old who did it. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If anything, it arguably makes more sense that she's young enough that even as smart as she is, as much of a little genius as she is, she's still not mature yet. She's still a kid. So the idea that someone made her angry and she's like, "I'll split your arms, mother effer."
Let me show you total protonic reversal.
Oh, dear. So, yeah. Honestly, maybe the best little, like, 2-second moment in the whole movie.
Yeah, probably.
So Carrie Coon's like, "Hey, you don't want to see me again, do you, Paul Rudd?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course I do. You're a mess. I'm a mess. We can be messies together." So it actually has kind of a sweet ending, despite the fact that her kid's jail time interrupted the day. But this is where he goes to Walmart. He's decided that he wants to comfort himself after a date that's went sideways. So he goes out to Walmart. He goes up to the Baskin Robbins section. He's like, "Ooh, this flavor," and I can't remember what it was, but he really pointed it out.
Yeah.
And then he grabs some other stuff and he goes over to the marshmallows. Can you guess what we might be referencing here, David?
The moment that because it tracks him as he's walking into the aisle, so like the marshmallows appear off the right side of the screen and they're like a little out of focus. But the moment that I registered that it was marshmallows, I was like, movie. No, look, there's nothing to justify the fact that this exists. Like that was purely that one scene in Ghostbusters 1. You can't bring this back, movie. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah,
but no.
This feels like one of the most egregious things in the whole movie is that they found a way. I mean, I know it's not the giant Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, but the idea that we have all these mini Stay Puft Marshmallow Mans. Well, I say mini. That's just probably their actual size.
We have kids' toys. That's what it is. We have Sony saying like, "Wait a minute, hold on. Baby Yoda says what?" And they just decided to make a whole damn toy line off this. So
they obviously just start doing antics. They start doing Gremlins antics where one of them like accidentally commits suicide in a blender because another one turns a blender on and he floats for a little bit, but then he falls into the actual blaze and then just splats. I couldn't help but feel that every time this happened to one of these guys that it was like something a bit dirty. There was just like a splat of white substance, and I couldn't help but let my mind just go a little bit crude with it.
That's right. It's because they never show any pain or anything like that. They're all enjoying themselves to like a almost perverted extent. They're like, "Yay, the sweet release of death." My favorite one though was they were crossing a stovetop, like a grill top, and one of them goes full Terminator 2. Like he starts
melts.
melting in the fire, and he even does like the thumbs up on the way down.
Yeah, and then there's another one where the others are turning them into a s'more, and I don't know why they would be doing that, because they're not going to eat them.
That's what I'm saying, though. They just crave the sweet release of death. That's all it is. They want to die.
Apparently, but yeah, I hate this sequence. And all of it, it's just building up to the big demon dog coming for him. He's going to be our keymaster.
Which, the demon dog, ho ho ho, is sitting in the next aisle over eating Purina Pet Chow, available at your local Walmart for all you pet owners. Get your dog big and strong like a demon dog.
Yeah, I didn't mention this earlier, but when we went to the burger place, there was lots of like Coca-Cola cups, just you know.
Oh yeah,
just for that. But anyway, so basically, yes, he runs to his car. The dog comes after him. I will say, despite the fact that the dog's CG, I did appreciate that they did go out of their way. I don't really want to see it again. I think it's a mistake to be doing this plot. But I did appreciate that they still gave it a bit of rigidness, like it was still stop motion. It's not stop motion or anything like that, but they still kind of tried to give it a bit of a similar feel, and I appreciate that effort.
Yeah, no, I think that it goes back to what I was saying with like the weird lightning lines on the trap, is that they recognize that some of the charm of this is the like 80s cheese of it, and they are, as much as they can, improve it and make it blend into the scene a hell of a lot better than the first movie did. They are still choosing to keep a few things that just kind of put it into a slightly uncanny territory. Yeah.
Whereas, obviously, our gatekeeper, the other one, is going to be Callie. Her build up to it's a bit different, though, because it just kind of jumps out at her in a split second. There's a big scene happening before that point, but it's got nothing to do with her being scared or running away from it. The dog itself just kind of appears and jumps at her out the shadows. The scene itself is her finding... Well, actually, it's the ghost leading her down to the secret basement and her going down the pole, seeing all the stuff, but most notably seeing all of the photographs of her childhood that he's kept, and he's clearly been keeping tabs on how she's doing, what her life is like, all that kind of thing. And there's definitely some photos here that are just clearly some of Carrie Coon's own like photos from when she was a teenager.
I think all of them are just Carrie Coon's photos.
And I was like, okay, that's funny, because she looks genuinely like 17 in that one Polaroid. Fair enough. Yeah. Good job.
Yeah, this is the scene where someone, did the math, because it was a specific year listed and then a specific age for her. And it was like, if you backdated it, it was, she should have been born before Ghostbusters 1. Yeah,
funny how Egon never mentioned having a wife and kid.
That never came up
in that first movie. Never told Janine, back down, woman. I am a taken man. I have a child.
All right, let's run with the theory, though. Is it possible that he left his wife and kid to like go do the Ghostbusters thing and like be the paranormal scientist that we see him in being in Ghostbusters 1?
It doesn't feel like it fits what I know about him, but I mean, I guess technically it could be true.
That being said, I do think they specifically say he ran away from his family to this farm in Oklahoma.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, never mind.
That implies after Ghostbusters 2. So how much after? Who knows? Who can say?
We'll just say that the Ghostbusters had a weird time travel adventure somewhere in there that lines up everything in the timeline, right?
Why not? Why not? Could have had further adventures.
Yeah.
But she... one of the things I disliked about this, obviously, the kids find her just sitting there in the chair and she's kind of mumbling to herself and they're like, Mom, are you okay? What's going on now? And I felt like they went out of their way to like give her red eyes and like really put on like a demonic voice immediately. And I'm like, I'm remembering the first movie and I'm thinking of Dana. And I'm like, yeah, she's acting out a character, but they didn't give her like growling sound effects like immediately to like show us it, because she's like, I am not Mom.
She quotes the line directly.
There is no Mom,
that's true.
only Zool.
I love that because, again, I was insufferable to watch this movie with. The moment that she was in the chair, they were like, Mom, I said it with the movie. I was like, there is no Mom, only Zool, right? Right? That's what you're going to say, movie?
But they have modulated her voice and added on, whatever to it. And it sounds like it was too much compared to the original for me. But,
Well, that was the whole sequence where Lewis was running through town as the Keymaster or whatever, and he was just Lewis. He was just talking as himself. He didn't need to have the modulated voice.
So she first grabs Podcast and runs her hands through his hair and goes, "Are you the gatekeeper?" And I'm like, "Kid, you've got a shot here with Carrie Coon. Thank your lucky days." And then he's...
If anybody asks you if you're a god, you say yes.
Oh, that'll come up later. Don't worry.
Yep.
We'll get that reference out of the way. She runs out the window, though. She runs away. Go meets up
That's the most comedic shot in the movie for me. Because, like, she just flails her way out through this window. Just Carrie Coon. It's so funny.
But she goes and runs out to Paul Rudd. And
Out in the desert.
Out of the desert. She magically has a dress, like, and we see it change. Like, she has like whatever shirt and jeans she was wearing, and she just goes ta-da, and it turns into, it's a different color, but it's basically the same dress that Dana had in Ghostbusters 1 when she was possessed. And I never took that in Ghostbusters 1 as the demon or the ghost magically gave her that outfit because it liked it. I took that as, no, that was something she had in her closet for the date she was going to go on with Venkman, and then she got possessed, right?
I never read it as that way that you were seeing it. I just kind of took it as like, this is something she had in her closet, and then Zool just changed into it for whatever reason.
Sure. But I never took it as, oh, no, the demon, like, yeah, I don't know. This just felt weird to me. No, magically, though, when the woman gets possessed by this dog, she always has a dress with this same kind of like open arm kind of thing going on.
See, now I kind of wish they would have done the flip side, where Paul Rudd got the gatekeeper, and so he got that dress thing going on, because the demon dogs would have no concept of gender like that. They could easily just make Paul Rudd into that.
Yeah, and the kids have been reading about Gozar, or at least Podcast has, so he's like, yeah, they're off to go get to know each other formally to release Gozar. And they're like, okay, oh well, that's awkward. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of the action part of the movie where they say, we have to do something about this. We have to save the town. We have to save our mom. Yada, yada, yada.
We skipped over a whole goddamn thing.
Did we? What did we skip over?
The proton packs, keeping down the well of souls.
Oh, is that before they come back and see the mum?
Yeah, because remember, Paul Rudd, when he gets possessed, he goes and sabotages it. So
that's right. That has to come first, right? Well, it's not a big deal. That happens before they find their mum. They go down to the cave. They basically realize this mine area is like going to have answers, and there's a bunch of things, including Ivo Shandor in like a glass coffin, who has somehow magically been frozen in time because he wakes up later on. Yeah, and suddenly J.K. Simmons is here for one scene.
That drove me bonkers, because I'm looking at him as he's laying there. I'm like, I don't think that's a recognizable actor. But then he like turns his head directly to the camera. I'm like, J.K. what are you doing here? I didn't know you were in this movie.
Was Terminator Genesis not enough for you, Simmons?
Nope. He's got a 17-picture deal with Sony.
Actually, that may have been a Sony movie as well, now you say it. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
I wasn't making that connection. But yeah, basically they sort of deduce a bunch of things. Egon has set up like 4 proton packs that cross the streams automatically every time the ghosts try to rise up, and that's actually what's causing the earthquakes. It's this nuclear like rupture that's happening.
Can I just say how much I love, like, this is one of those things where each movie, every time they do it, they just lessen the impact of it, of what crossing the streams means. Because the first time they do it, they're just like, well, we all might die here. This is it. This is the end of it. Meanwhile, he just set up to do something to do it every 15 minutes. Just screw it. Why not?
Yeah, they also deduce that in this cave, there's a bunch of dates that predict major things, and there's like one's like 1850 something, and it's this volcano erupting. One's
it's
one's
stuff
that.
to do with big explosions.
One's 1945, and the character Lucky says what didn't happen, but I took that specifically as Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I took that as the bombs. And then 1984 is there, and then next it's 2021. It's like this is the next time that this is going to try and open up and do all its shit. So yeah.
Yep. I rolled my eyes at the dates thing just because it kind of felt like, wow, how cool of the ancient Sumerians to use our totally arbitrary calendar that we picked out. But I'll just assume Sandor translated it. Yeah,
that makes sense. He just converted it. Although I will say this, when Gozar does like come out, and like we get the one real scene with Sandor where he's up and around, and he's like, hey, Gozar, I brought you back so that we could rule the world together, and Gozar just kills him instantly. Like, he
rips him in half.
He's just the punchline. And I'm like, but you want him to seem mysterious and cool for doing all this shit, because it feels like you just neutered it there.
I don't know. I kind of like that idea more because it really sells this idea of, yeah, Shandor had a whole lot of mystical know-how, like he knew how to funnel Gozer and like get all this working, but he still was just a man, and as soon as Gozer showed up, he would have been like, I don't care about you at all. You don't matter to me in the least.
That makes sense. I guess I just think having him be here physically was a mistake in the first place. I think he should have just been... No, he did all this in the past because he wanted all this to happen, but he's not around anymore.
I think what they should have done is have him show up as one of the ghosts in, like, the well. So he gets out and he's like, yes, hooray, I'm back, and I'm here with Gozer, and I'm the one who set all this up, Gozer. And Gozer's like, I don't care, and just, like, banishes him back down into hell. Yeah.
So like you say, Paul Rudd sabotages this stuff, and then he makes with Callie to release Gozer, which we see like this like cave area kind of like form the steps. It's like they sort of come out of the sculpture, and it forms that same sort of stair design that the original movie had at the end, which is like, okay. Meanwhile, the kids go to the police station, and because ghosts have like, because we get the same thing as the original movie when Gozer's coming out. We see all the bright lights coming out of the mountain, like the ghosts.
I love the bright lights. I love that they pulled that back. I thought it was corny in the first movie because like the special effect didn't hold up, but I think this was a perfect use of it coming back again.
Yeah, I guess. I think I'm just too annoyed that we're just doing the third act of the first movie at this point. Yeah, so absolutely. It's hard to really enjoy any of it. That said, when the kids go to the police station, the police are all just not there because they're all dealing with ghost stuff around town. Like, okay, what do we do? How can we get in? They actually get into the main evidence area really easily. Like, just Lucky just knows how to get in there. But all they find is a bunch of shitty guns. I actually really like that. I felt like a little political line where Phoebe is like, oh, I didn't find anything, just more stupid guns, and just drops like 5 guns on the floor. I thought that's a little funny.
I didn't even take it as political. I just took it as more like, these are useless. They will not help us solve our problem.
So, but there's like another cage in here that's locked, and it's set up early in the movie that Phoebe can pick locks, which doesn't really come up that much, other than the fact that she picks the lock into the house at the start of the movie. But she mentioned she can't pick this because it's, a special deadbolt. You can't do it, right?
I like the line here where she's with Podcast and she's like, this is this super special type of deadbolt lock, and he's like, I believe in you, and she's like, no, like that's actually impossible. We can't pick that.
Yeah,
and she's like, oh, all right, well, plan B.
But this cage is like big wide bars, so Podcast just sort of stretches his arm in and opens the trap, which they caught Muncher in earlier. So Muncher comes out and starts eating through the bars, and I'm like, okay, that's an alright little payoff. You set him up.
They've used more of a payoff than Slimer had.
For sure, yeah. So they get their stuff back. Callie's even suiting up. Like, they get like all the overalls. I suppose one of the most unbelievable things about the whole movie is just how well that overall still fits Phoebe, given how tall and like small she is.
I was gonna say, she's like 4 foot something. There's no way.
And Egon was a tall dude. He was the tallest of the Ghostbusters. And I know they've got the sleeves rolled up a little bit, but I'm like, even the torso should feel like it's going past their, like,
I was gonna say, like, the crotch of her pants should be down around her knees. Yeah. Like, that's the way this should fit her.
But hey, whatever. Let's not question it. So Trevor suits up, Lucky shoots up, and of course Podcast shoots up. Suits up, not shoot. That's a very different movie.
Yes. They decided they're going to embrace the end of the world. They're going to have some fun on their way out.
Lucky goes elsewhere to go set something up, but as we find out, because by this point in the movie, like, they've talked about how the front, dirt area is meant to be a big trap. Like, they know what the plan was meant to be, so they're going to enact it. So this is actually where we get sort of the mimic of that original shot in the first movie where the garage door opens and the Ecto-1 comes out, but now it's the police station, and they come out turning. So yeah,
the whole siren blaring the whole time. The wow, wow.
I did have some questions here though about how the Ecto-1 drove into the place where the stairs are with Gozer inside the mine. They've literally got it hiding behind some rocks, and I'm like, was there like an entrance for a car to come in here?
Well, Pete, you remember that elevator that was barely rickety enough to hold 2 people?
Yes.
They just loaded a car onto that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Clearly. And then when they needed to leave, they've lifted it back up again.
Phoebe just tries to distract Gozer with bad jokes.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about it that much, but like throughout this movie, anytime there's like kind of a quiet moment or a moment where it's a little bit awkward, she kind of tries to fill the dead air with bad jokes and puns.
Yep.
And that's just the whole way that she's planning on distracting Gozer here. Not even like, Gozer, return to the dimensional that you returned from. It's like, what do you call a fish with no eyes? A fish. And Gozer's just like, what's happening here? What are we doing?
The whole plan here is to use the remote control trap, sneak it underneath the dog, and basically trap the ghost that's like obviously surround the mum. So the mum kind of comes back, Callie comes back, and they grab her and jump in the car, and they
because Gozer
flee.
can only exist if both dogs are there. So
it takes her out of the game for a little bit. So there's a whole thing where they're in the Ecto-1 driving back, and she's like sort of just gradually realizing that her son, who's not allowed to drive, is driving, and that her daughter's on a gunner seat. Because at one point they open the gunner seat, and she's like, "Why is my daughter doing that? What's happening?" Rush of things going on here. So, but they're racing back to the farm because the whole idea is they want the sort of spirit form of Gozar to come out onto the dirt trap. And they've got Lucky waiting at the farmhouse. She sort of kicks the door down and comes out with the proton pack to try and like catch her by surprise. And the plan goes okay at first to a point. There's some hiccups. There's many marshmallow men messing up with Trevor's proton pack, and
the initial thing is that they pretty much reenact the opening scene shot for shot, where it ends up failing at the power source level. Like they try flipping it and then the power source fails. And that's when they get Lucky coming out of the house with her own proton pack. She blasts Gozer, distracting for a little while. But then Gozer gets the trap, and Zool ends up possessing Lucky this time.
Instead, yeah.
So now Trevor's like, no, my girlfriend? ?
Yeah, so Gozer's back in full force. I will say, like, when we're doing the whole mini Stay Puft Marshmallow Men thing for a bit, I think this may be after the other Ghostbusters show up, but Trevor eventually gets his proton pack working, and he realizes that shooting at Gozar is a mistake, and he instead chooses to shoot at the conductors to give it power.
Source.
Yeah. And I was like, you know what, that was actually a smart little move. I kind of appreciated that. Obviously, their plan fails, though, initially, and it seems like all hope is lost until, of course, we get the other three Ghostbusters showing up. And they come out of their coffins, walk onto the set. And
at one point, we get the whole bit where Ray is like doing the on behalf of the da-da-da, and he's like saying all the things he represents, and he literally says the AARP, which is, in America, it's just like the Old People Association. And I'm like, all right, own it, I guess.
Yeah, and she's like, are you a god? And I was like, okay, I don't mind them paying this off, because to be fair, in the original movie, when he made this mistake initially and didn't say yes, the others said, when someone asks you, Ray, if you're a god, you say yes. So if anything should come back and be like sort of paid off, it's this, because they actually said, if it ever happens again, make sure you goddamn say the right thing. I think they overdid it though, where like the other two sort of looking at Ray now Ray, don't you say the wrong thing now, Ray. I'm like, come on, like you can't just make the reference, you have to like beat it over the heads with it. Come on.
I agree. I do agree. I think that the initial joke works because he hesitates. Like they ask for a second, he hesitates, and then they're like, seriously, dude? Like, come on, you know this one. And then he finally says yes. And it's only after that point where both Ernie Hudson and Bill Murray like also lean into it. They're also like, yeah, we're all gods down here on Earth. You know how it is. That's where I think it takes it too far. That's where I think they push to the point where it breaks.
So the big dramatic moment, though, is that they actually try crossing the streams. It's the first idea they have, because that's what worked the first time, but it doesn't this time. She throws away all the she uncrosses them, basically pulls them apart and throws them away, and they all go flying back. And little Phoebe, like sole Ghostbuster kid, like fires her proton pack at her, and she's struggling to sort of like keep a hold of her, and it's like the others are getting back up or whatever. And it's the sort of thing where like I knew the first time I saw this, I knew what was about to happen. It was like this movie has taken the bait every single time it could do something.
Oh yeah.
Right? So there was no way in hell they weren't doing it. But to be honest, I wasn't completely against the way it happens here, where she's struggling, she's literally sliding back in the ground with the proton pack as Gozer's coming for her, and you see the ghost hand around her hand, right? Yeah. And the camera kind of spins round and you see Ghost Egon literally backing her up and like giving her extra strength. And I'm like, you know what? If they left it at that, I don't think I'd have too many complaints about seeing Ghost Egon.
I agree. I think it's fine that Ghost Egon's there. Here's the problem I have, which you misrepresented ever so slightly.
Okay, I apologize. Do clarify.
It is in a way that I think makes all the difference. She's not trying to hold Gozer. She is in a beam struggle with Gozer. Gozer's firing off lightning from her fingers, and Phoebe's using the proton pack in like this thing where it's like, oh, who's gonna have more power? Who's gonna fight that? That was stupid to me. That was inherently that's fair. Not something that we've ever seen them be able to do with the proton packs. But
I watched this like 8 hours ago. I'd forgotten the lightning beams with the fingers.
I watched it 16 hours ago, and that moment sat with me because I didn't like it that much.
But here's the thing, though. Ghost Egon hangs around for like 10 minutes. Like, there's so much stuff, but I mean, he never speaks. They never have him speak. But there's like a moment where like, the other three Ghostbusters start firing at her as well, right, at Gozer. And we do this moment where Phoebe's lined up with the original three Ghostbusters, and Egon's like sort of got his arms around her, helping her. So there's this moment where the camera like comes down the original Ghostbusters, and they all start looking over at Egon, like, and making kind of like faces and saying it's nice to see him or whatever else to say.
Yeah. I figured you'd show up.
Yeah, it's all just these sweet moments and whatever. And don't get me wrong, I get that you have all these moments with Ghost Egon and the others. I get that you want to end it with his daughter, because let's face it, as much as maybe it's been kind of sweet that he's been helping his granddaughter, the one that he actually has to make amends with is his daughter. That's the one that's the most connected to him. So I get why you have to end it with her. But it's so funny though, because she has like a little heart-to-heart moment with Paul Rudd first, because they break Paul Rudd and Lucky out of the stone versions of the dog, like the first movie, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, hey, I think we might have had sex or something. It's like, yeah, I think we did. But they're kind of smiling about it, like, oh well, it's probably going to happen anyway, so let's just roll with it. It's fine. Obviously it's important that she is like normal again for all this final stuff, because all of this, like, her kids are in trouble, she gets to see her dad, and she has all these moments. She has to be normal. I almost wonder if, like, at some point it was always meant to be Lucky who was like the turned into the dog, but they realized at some point that implying that Paul Rudd and the teenager had sex was probably just too creepy. So it's like, no, we'll make it the mum first, and we'll have a little bit of plot that explains how she gets undogified, and then it switches to Lucky for the ending.
I think you might have something there. The only thing is that would mean they also would have had to throw out the line, there is no mom, only Zool. Or maybe they would have had to just move it later into the third act. But yeah,
it could
I
have
can see that.
It could have just been Lucky saying it to Trevor. There is no Lucky, only Zool.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. The idea of there is no mom, only Zool just sounds better to me. It's more of a funny line.
That's fair. Like, maybe they never planned that. I just wonder if and I'm not even saying like it got far. I'm just saying, like, in one of the first drafts, like, or even just when they were conceptualizing it, they had that, because it feels a bit weird to me that we do the whole thing with the mum turning into the dog, but we have to have her around for everything else in the third act, so we have to do the switcheroo where someone else becomes the dog, and I just feel like maybe something changed somewhere along the way.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there. I think if they did switch it along the way, it doesn't feel out of place, because obviously they would have had to get the scene from the mines to this farm regardless. Yeah. So it works. It definitely works for what the plot ended up being. Yeah,
I could be completely wrong. It was something that popped in my head as I was watching this.
I think that's probably, they got like a cork board full of characters, and they're like, and then this character becomes a dog, and then they like ran through a few options and figured out all the different consequences, and they're like, it's either Lucky or the mom. Screw it, do both.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, obviously it's the four kids, the two younger kids and the two teenagers that become effectively the Ghostbusters in this movie. But looking ahead at the next time, it's actually, it's the, I mean, I think the other kids are in it, but it seems to be more like a family thing. It's the two main kids plus Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon that are the Ghostbusters. I mean, the old ones are still there, seemingly based on the trailer, but like I don't know how much time they're getting or what else they're doing. But regardless, all this is to say that we get this big emotional heart swell as she hugs Ghost Egon, and a tear comes down her cheek as an emotional, sentimental theme plays. And all I could think was, can you imagine music this sentimental playing at any point in the original Ghostbusters?
Nah, not at all.
You can't.
I mean, they always ended with the pop hit, so no, it doesn't make any sense here. But a few other tiny little things that happen there at the end that I think just wrap up a few plots.
Go on.
We have Bill Murray walks over to Phoebe and I think Callie, and it's basically just like, hey, yeah, cool, you guys are Egon's kids. Great, we're going to go in, have a drink. Let's go. And then Podcast talks to Ray.
Yes. Ray's has one subscriber.
Yep, he has one subscriber, and Ray is it. And he's just like, yeah, no, I think your show really found its voice at episode 46.
Yes.
It's like, all right, man.
I mean,
whatever.
I can't deny that's a payoff to an earlier line, so it is technically a punchline. I just don't think... it feels very forced to me. This entire podcast character and the way he talks feels a little forced to me.
Yeah, and then the only other thing, and I only bring this up because it felt useless in the moment.
Oh, is
but
this
once
Ernie
we get
Hudson?
to the post-credit scene, Ernie Hudson, he walks over to the Ecto-1, he pats it, he sees how much like it's been roughed up, and he's like, don't worry, baby, I'll take care of you. Doesn't do anything there, but we'll get to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he says, I'll take you home and take care of you. After Ghost Harold Ramis like disappears and like she's left standing there on her own and everyone's all kind of like bittersweet happy because they've got to have this goodbye, the camera like, goes up to the sky and it just says for Harold, which is nice. Like, absolutely, I get it. You're dedicating the movie to him. That's totally fine. And the final shot of the movie, not including mid and post credit things, is just a shot of the bridge going into New York and the themes start. That noise at the start of the main song. I can't even describe it. It's just like
it's the ethereal like
right. And you can just hear the siren. Like I loved it. Winston's driving it back to New York. He literally turns on the siren just so he can avoid some traffic.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But the song kicks in. It says Ghostbusters, and credits roll. But but we've got some other tidbits to get to. There's some other things. And what's so funny about the mid credit scene is that they're doing the opening titles of the movie right as the credits start, and it's like, hey, this person's in it, this person's in it, and then at the end of the credits it says special appearances by, and it's like Bill Murray, Ernie Hudson, blah, blah. And then it says, and Sigourney Weaver. And I'm like, where was she? Right after that, the mid-credit scene starts, and it's her. And they're basically doing a play on Bill Murray's opening scene from the original, but it's actually her doing the cards and saying, hey, what's on here? And Bill Murray's like, oh, I think it's 3 wavy lines. And she's like, very impressive. And he's like making up bullshit about how he's got psychic powers. But she's just shocking him for the fun of it in between the questions.
Well, it's every time he admits to being like a dick. He's just like, yeah, did you know I used to just shock the guys? And then she's like, bad. Yeah. No, don't do that.
It's really funny to me that Sigourney Weaver, I mean, they all had cameos in that 2016 movie as well, but it's funny to me that Sigourney Weaver's cameos in both were both mid-credit scenes.
Yeah.
That is really funny. But I mean, this was like, I mean, I hate that it was just all a reference to a scene in Ghostbusters 1.
Yeah, that's the thing. But you see that scene and like, okay, it's a nice enough scene. Independently, it'd be something that I wouldn't mind seeing on like a YouTube sketch or something of like, hey, we got the original cast back and we're just going to have them say like, where are they 20 years later? But this is the mid-credits scene and it feels like it's simultaneously doing nothing while at the same time trying to give you more of like references of what they already had.
I will say at least their chemistry was still there. Like that is the one thing I got out of it, is that it felt natural seeing them banter off each other still, even all these years later. And then if you wait to the very, very end, they do a really bold thing here where they start with a deleted scene, which is wild. So you see a scene presumably from the original Ghostbusters, because it seems to be when Janine was kind of flirting with Egon. And maybe he's going off for the final thing. And
he's going up into the final Manhattan fight.
Yeah. And she gives him a coin and says, hey, it's this, special coin or something. I can't even remember what she said about it. But
it's a commemorative coin from the World's Fair that she has. That's her lucky coin.
That's right. but she's got a second one at home, so she wants to give him this. And it's kind of wild because they've remastered this, because the deleted scenes, if I remember right from the DVD and Blu-ray and stuff, they all look like shit. Like they've been just treated so badly over the years. But this one's obviously been remastered so it can be put in the movie. And it smash cuts from this deleted scene to Janine present day holding her coin and looking at it all wistfully. And she's at a office building to see Winston. And she's like, hey, Winston, like, what was it? And Winston starts sort of waxing lyrically about how the good times were there and he's never forgotten being a Ghostbuster, and how Egon was the brains, Ray was the heart, and Peter was keeping things afloat. Or whatever
I think he said he kept it sexy.
Yeah. And of course, we have to directly reference a line from the first movie. He says, we had the talent, we had the tools, because he said that in the first movie. Mm-hmm. There's another tick in the box for you. But as he's saying this, we also see footage of him get into the fire station, and he's clearly bought it. He's clearly going to, he's brought the car here. He's going to set up Ghostbusters again in the city. And he says, I might be a successful businessman now, but I'll always be a Ghostbuster. And the final shot is it goes down to the containment unit in the building that's still there, and there's a red light flashing just to indicate that there's something ghostly going to happen.
Okay.
Sequel bait, basically.
Sony. It's what Sony does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to wind back just a little bit here. Just a tiny little bit.
Is this the line about it being a Starbucks and how it's not a Starbucks in the post-credit scene?
No. None of that. I mean, that's just blatantly wrong. They shouldn't have done that. But regardless, if you have so many references in your movie that you run out and you have to start pulling the deleted scenes to make more references, you've had enough. Please leave.
Okay, I agree with that sentiment. To play devil's advocate, I think the idea here was to basically show some genuine new Harold Ramis footage, because obviously all the ghost stuff is, it's CG, it's someone standing in and then manipulate. I think the idea was, hey, you get to see him one last time for real. This was footage that, maybe it was on the deleted scenes before, so you might have seen it, but this is like a new genuine scene of him really being Egon.
All right, I'm gonna pause it there. I'm gonna say that the better place to put that is when Gruberson is showing them YouTube videos of the Ghostbusters.
Okay.
And it seems like they're just recorded from different angles. You just put it there.
Okay.
Because I think putting it here, and especially the fact that they, I told you before, I was waiting for the dice from the Millennium Falcon. I was waiting for the epitome of that. This was it. This is a deleted scene where we never actually knew about this coin. If you watch the theatrical cut movies, and they're making it out to be this thing that she has this heartfelt attachment to. No, that's too much. It is a bridge too far.
That's fair. I cannot argue with that. It's funny. I feel like ultimately the critiques of this movie are maybe a little repetitive almost, because it is fundamentally all just boiling down to the one or two key things, which is it is a fan service movie. It's a movie made to be fan service first and a movie second. And that's a problem, because I know the bad faith argument whenever you say something's too fan service is well, shouldn't a new movie in a franchise aim to please its fans? Well, yeah, it should please its fans by being a good movie that has something to say, that continues or evolves what the franchise was. And obviously there's always a debate if something should have a sequel or not, but let's just assume that you're going to do one anyway. You can make a good movie. You can justify it by making something that says something. And when you've got a movie like this, which is fan service first, it's hollow, it's designed around all the things they want to reference, and they did an okay job building a plot around that. But it makes me think of that CG Super Mario Brother movie last year. It's the same sort of thing. That movie was built around all the things they wanted to reference, and the plot was just this skeleton they could kind of wrap around it to make it all fit together, however loosely it might have been. And I
get that. I think there's a difference between pleasing the audience, working with the audience, and then catering to the audience, giving them, as you said it so elegantly before, and I know you lifted it from somewhere else, there is a thing is too much dessert.
Yeah.
It is the idea that you can have these moments. There's nothing wrong with having these moments. The key is sparingly. The key is every once in a while, just to whet your appetite and say, we didn't forget you. We still are keeping you in mind.
It's not...
But we're doing something new.
It shouldn't be... Like, obviously, it'll get a lot of the people in the theater, right? I get that. But it shouldn't be... Once they're in watching the movie, that stuff shouldn't be the main point of the movie. Like, give them a little bit of it. I think a great example is we recently did Rise of the Planet of the Apes on the Ace, and that's got a great reference to the original film that's used at the right time. There is a couple of other small ones that I do think I could do without, but imagine having that kind of moment where obviously you have to have the Ecto 1, the proton packs and stuff, because otherwise, like, what are they using? But imagine, other than that, there was no direct references to anything in the original movie until a big, prominent beat where it feels like it's making a mission statement. And by that point, I think why that works so well when it does work is that by the time Rise of the Planet of the Apes makes its big reference to the original, it's already won you over. It's already justified why this is actually a compelling story. And then you do that to sort of say, hey, we're side by side with that movie now. Whereas this movie couldn't even dream of being side by side with the original movie because its entire existence only serves to function, hey, remember how good Ghostbusters was?
Yeah. No, I think you're straight up right there. I remember when the marketing for this movie began and people were saying like, oh yeah, it's a bunch of kids and they get the Ghostbusters gear and they become the Ghostbusters. That plot, that idea right there sounded really cool to me. It, like you said, it may have been too close to Stranger Things or whatever, but the idea that it's not the continuation of the previous story in the aspect of it's their family and they know who the Ghostbusters are. I was super hyped on the idea of they just got the gear. They just found this stuff and they started doing their own thing with it. And I think there is a super interesting story that could have been told with that lens. But instead, Sony was just like, people didn't like new from 2016. They got cold feet and they went back to the well harder than anybody has before.
But new wasn't the problem with that movie.
But that's what Sony thinks it is.
That's what they think it is. In fact, we're recording this just as Madame Web is doing terrible in theaters, and there's statements coming out about Sony executives saying how, this is why we can't do new franchises or franchises with women at the center of it because this is the sort of disaster you have. I'm like, no, maybe the fact that you made a garbage movie's the problem, you tits.
Yeah. Yep. Let it never be said Sony learns from their mistakes.
Oh, God. Like, the video game side of Sony, love them. The movie side of Sony, hate them. hate them so much.
I'm just waiting for Sony to come out with okay guys, we've got a great idea. It's a portable thing where you could hold music in it and it's called the Sony Pod. And it's like, Sony, we kind of moved on past that.
This is a rough time.
Yeah. But again, it's not bad. It is competent.
No,
it does what it's doing decently. It's just frustrating.
It does, like this movie, alongside Terminator Dark Fate, alongside Star Wars The Force Awakens, alongside Halloween 2018, it's another example. Like, these legacy return sequels, they all kind of operate in a very similar space, for the most part, where they're competently made, although Halloween 2018, I wouldn't really say that, I suppose. That's worse than that. But that happens to be badly directed, so whatever.
Yeah, but it fits the same genre.
Yeah. But they all hinge on this nostalgia and trying to tie everything in, so it's this Passing of the Torch storyline. Force Awakens, Jurassic World's the other one, the other big example.
Absolutely.
Which they all have this thing where none of them are terrible movies, really, right? Some are better than others, but even the ones that are pretty competent and serve their function well enough, after I sort of noticed the formula of this is how we can bring something back and appease the people who may get upset if we do something that doesn't respect and love it. They give everything from the original movies so much reverence, way more than they deserve. And it's so funny to me because there was a time when the opposite was the problem. There was a time in Hollywood where a lot of sequels would not respect the original, and it would be like a slap in the face to anyone who cared about the previous movie. This is so far in the opposite end of the spectrum that it's just as bad, but for different reasons. Because now it's we can't dare even have an an interesting idea. Everything has to be, no. All of this is about loving and respecting every detail that the fans love about that original movie. We can't dare to betray any of that. And yeah, there's absolutely things that you could betray that would piss me off in terms of, like, you know, missing the point, or, you know, I mean, Halloween 2018 pisses me off a lot because it doesn't understand why Halloween worked. I mean, arguably a lot of these Lego sequels don't, but I think there's a middle ground where you can celebrate the thing you're a part of and the thing that you're continuing and say something new with it, and also tell a movie that will work on its own because it functions on its own with its own stakes, its own story. But everything in this is about, this is the villain from the first movie. This is still part of his plan. This was all something Egon was trying to stop, you know, in the intervening years. Everything hinges on loving that original movie. But anyone who loves the original Ghostbusters for what it was isn't finding the same type of movie here. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's definitely an audience for this. In fact, I think I noticed earlier, this is a 7.1 on IMDb. That is shockingly high on IMDb for a movie like this. And that tells you that there is a big enough audience that this pandering absolutely works for.
Oh, yeah. I think for me, the thing that Hollywood needs to view these movies as is not a legacy sequel, not a soft reboot, not a however they want to determine it. They just need to view it as a sequel. They need to write the movie as if this is just what comes next. They don't need to view this through the lens of like, oh, but like it's 30 years later. The fans need to, like, they need to be respected. We need to talk to them as if they're the kings and queens of this. No, they don't, because this is the same problem I have in like comics and stuff like that, is that the release schedule doesn't matter. Like, in the moment, yeah, you're going to piss some people off, however it is it comes out. Either you have it be delayed early, whatever like that. But when you get 10, 15, 20 years removed, no one gives a crap that this one was the one that came out 30 years after the original. It's just the next one in the sequence. So you playing it up as if there was this huge gap of time there, no one's going to care a decade later. It's not going to matter. Make it the follow-up to the story first. Make it so that this is what actually happens next. And then if you want to do anything that's a callback to the original, make it make sense. Don't make it just there for the sake of, but you remember that, right?
Yeah. It's also just a thing of like how you're presenting a lot of it, because like we were saying, so much of it is just how the camera treats some of these things that it brings back. It's not just that the proton pack is there. We have to masturbate over it. We have to like slowly go up and down it like it's a sexy leg, you know?
Yeah.
We have to treat it that way, and I think that's and it's also, and I think the other problem with this as well is that they feel toothless. And I think Force Awakens, being the first of this kind of wave that kind of established this formula, didn't feel too bad at the time. And maybe because Star Wars had in a way been so like mistreated with those horrible prequels, that at least it kind of made sense in a weird way to have this kind of like, okay, we're going back to basics and then we can evolve past that. But that has its own weird tale where a lot of people didn't like the second one, and then Rise of Skywalker was this just absolute garbage mess of trying to like service the fans with no actual creative backbone to it, you know? It doesn't feel like a movie made by a director. It feels like a movie that was churned into an AI algorithm that said, this is what will please the most people.
I mean, you're not wrong. I think that's what J.J. Abrams has turned into a lot of ways.
And here's the thing, though. If you try to please everyone, you will speak to and like form an attachment to absolutely no one. You'll just you'll give everyone something that everyone mildly thinks is okay. I would much rather have a movie, whether some are for me and some are not for me, but I would much rather have a movie that 10% of people love and the other 90% of people hate. Because for the people who love the thing, it'll be speaking to them so directly because it is such a unique thing that it'll feel more important to them. And that's always more interesting to me than a 6 out of 10 that everyone thinks is, yeah, it was fine. We watched it. It was okay. We got through it.
I mean, I don't think I'm making any controversial claim here when I say that the worst thing that humanity has done in the past like 2 decades is social media. Is the ability that anyone can just put their thing out there and it holds just as much weight as anybody else's opinion. Now, don't get me wrong. We are not professionals. Like, we are not like super high ranking, like Roger Ebert levels of film critique. We're people sitting here over Skype doing this. That's the level that we're at. To some extent, we rely on that same level of social media to get our opinions out there. But I feel like we at least try to come at it with some level of decency and like,
oh yeah, we have a conversation
looking at where things come from. Yeah. As opposed to so many social media posts, which again are the same sort of thing. Like when Last Jedi came out, where it was just like, how dare you destroy my entire reason for being?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like, this movie, I am being harsher on, or not even being harsher on. This movie annoyed me way more because it was the 4th or 5th movie of its kind, right? I listed a bunch of them just there, but these legacy sequels, and by the time this came out, all the tricks and all the pandering was all the more obvious to me. This is the thing, when you watch a lot of like a similar kind of movie, and you start to notice, like, see, when you're like 8, everything seems good, right? Nothing seems like a bad movie. And there's a kind of almost like a sort of like coming of age moment when you're like 10 or 11, where you watch something and go, I think I didn't like that. And you kind of like start to develop your reasons for why you like or dislike things. I think this is the same kind of thing, where this was like a trick that worked once, maybe twice. And then quite quickly, I started to just see how they were pandering, how the formula was being used to make these very, very safe, soulless movies that don't really have any artistic merit behind them. They are just a product to appease a fan group. And that's what truly makes this more of a franchise entry, a franchise product than it is a sequel, you know? Or,
see, that's the part that bothers me the most about this movie, though, is because while it is this franchise entry, it does try. It has this barely undercurrent of wanting to tell this deeper story of, like I said, Harold Ramis and his kid. It has this like an actual deeper core to it that is just tossed aside for the sake of marketability. And that's what frustrates me the most about it, is they had something and they chose not to use it.
Yeah. We'll see how the next one does. It might do well because people are sick of superhero movies, so they'll flock to it. It's kind of funny though, because like we're seeing a lot of these types of movies start to kind of flounder a little bit. Like the trailer for Beverly Hills Cop 4 came out like a couple months ago, and I remember watching the trailer just thinking, oh, I feel like this trend's done now. This trend feels like it's over, and this nostalgia sequel for Beverly Hills Cop has just missed the boat, and it's coming in late. And I do wonder how a second of this Ghostbusters era lands.
I think if they just kind of roll into their own thing, find their own feet, maybe allow Carrie, Coon, Paul Rudd, McKenna Grace, get them to do their own story, I might like it. But based off of like the trailers I'm seeing and the images I'm seeing, I have a feeling this is just going to be Remember That Part 2, where it's like, here we go.
I could be wrong, but the trailers seem to imply there's going to be more of the original characters, and that's, I think, a mistake.
Yeah, you need to start trimming back. That's the key. You can bring them there in order to get the audiences back in to an extent. Obviously, we think they overdid it in this, but then when you've got your feet, you've got your audience, you've got the people who may like this movie on its own, see if it can walk. See if it can just do its own thing. Don't let it have the training wheels on forever.
Yeah, so we'll see how that is next week. I'm genuinely curious to see how it turns out, because I think when I first heard the premise, I was like, you know what, this could be just like a fun episode of the cartoon, almost, with like a new threat. You've got this new team, but that second trailer really made me question any like hope I had. So we'll see. Hopefully it turns out to be good.
Down in the comments, tell us exactly what the Rotten Tomato score is for the movie right now.
All right, with all that said, what are you rating Ghostbusters Afterlife?
All right, I've been thinking. I'm looking at my ratings. I have such a broad score on this franchise here. Ghostbusters literally getting a 10 out of me, whereas 2016 couldn't even crack a 4. So I could pretty much put this wherever and it would kind of feel right in some way. But I think technically it's very good. It's well done there, I think, and that's like special effects, visuals, components like that. Obviously, the nostalgia wanking is just a little bit too much throughout the course of the movie. I think that tears it down a little bit. And the idea that it could have been something more, yeah, I think that's reason to kind of give it a little extra criticism of seeing, all right, they gave up something. What did they give it up for? And this is what they ended up on. And honestly, I'm not really impressed by that. So overall, I'm coming down on a 6. It's still better than average. It's over that median point. It's not like, as we said, it's not a bad movie to watch, but I think that this movie, as we said, cannot stand on its own. And in doing so, there's like an upper limit to how high it can really go.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I say, I understand there's an argument that a lot of good sequels can't necessarily stand on their own without their original, and that's somewhat true. But this is so reliant on just saying, hey, remember how much you like Ghostbusters that I can't help but feel it. I actually go with a 6 as well. I think 6 is the right score. I think it's the epitome. It's an easy watch, right? And it's at times somewhat amusing. At times there's a couple of fun scenes. I think it's more confident than that last movie that we got, which felt like just an extended improv session that went nowhere. I like the cast a bit more. I like the characters a bit more. I just, it's the saccharine reverence for the original movie is just too much, where it feels like almost like it's too meta in a way, because it's like, no, we're going to care about this the way the audience cares about this from their childhood. Like, no, I still want in universe it to still act like it was in the universe. I don't want to suddenly feel like a fan is making this. And obviously it's Ivan Reitman's son who directed this, who, by the way, I've seen a surprising amount of Jason Reitman's filmography. I was checking his IMDb and I'm like, oh, Up in There, I've seen that. Oh, Juno, I've seen that. Oh, Tully, I've seen that. Young Adult, I've seen that. I was like, oh, I've seen like 6 of this guy's movies. I didn't realize.
Yeah, he's pretty big.
Yeah. Didn't do the new Ghostbusters though, so we'll see how the new guy turns out.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Reitman is still a writer on the new one. But
he's a writer-producer, but he's not directing.
Yeah, the director was also a writer on this one, so maybe we can keep it in-house. Who knows?
Is that an omen or a good sign? I don't know. But
he's got 5 directing credits: Monster House, City of Ember, the 2015 Poltergeist, Scream the TV series he did 1 episode of, and then A Boy Called Christmas.
Oh, Poltergeist 2015 is not a good sign.
Well,
no.
That's Scary Ghosts, so let's go with Happy Ghosts.
Oh, no, that's not a good sign at all. This guy's track record's pretty bad. Okay. Well, hopefully it turns out for the better. We've went 2 hours on Ghostbusters Afterlife. Is it making the cut?
I think cutting it close. I think it's pretty textbook there. Some people are going to like it, some people are going to hate it, but it's like right down the middle there. I wouldn't say it's cut from the collection. That feels too harsh for sure.
It's weird because I don't necessarily think that the cut from the collection sort of scale necessarily just correlates 1-to-1 with the numbers, right?
Right.
So I get why technically a 6 sounds like it should be cutting it close. I do almost feel like it should be cut from the collection, because I think while it's perfectly fine as a watch, I don't think it's something that I would say anyone needs or should have, or it feels like I don't need a bunch of soulless 6 out of 10s. I guess is what I'm saying. So,
yeah. All right, I'll come down. I'll meet you there.
Yeah, I don't want to go any harsher than that. I don't want to say cut your losses or it cut deep by any means. But
look, this is an extra reels movie, Pete. We're not coming back to it.
It's not an extra reels. Madame Web though might be an extra reels movie. We've decided.
Yeah, but I'm not going to the theaters for that. So don't.
No. we can get to that.
No time soon.
We can get to that later on. But yeah. Anyway, that's the show, everyone. That's the collector's cut. Next time, of course, we'll be looking at Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And if you're hoping, maybe they'll have a good season after that. Unfortunately, no. David, for some reason, wrangled his way into picking the next season. And he picked Dance Movie season. So we'll be starting dance movies after Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.
I'm sorry, you're speaking like some of those are not the most classic 80s movies that exist, period.
Yeah. Although, as is the new tradition, there'll be a week off before we start the new season.
New tradition as long as Sony doesn't mess up the schedule again, you bastards.
Yeah, it didn't happen last time because Ghostbusters got pushed forward a week, so we had to start a week earlier. Assholes.
Yeah. That's the real reason I'm pissed about this.
Well, it's fine because Godzilla Kong's going to eat its lunch because it's out the week after. So
true.
Hope they have a good opening weekend because it's getting chomped on after. All right, that's the show, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. And like I said earlier on, we do have some bonus shows over on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. We just mentioned Extra Reels, which is the show at the $5 and up tier, where we review some of the worst movies of all time. It's a hoot, so you can check out that. We also have Criterion Cut, which is all tiers on Patreon, and that is where we review a movie from the Criterion collection. So it's very much the opposite of Extra Reels. It's the best of the best, hopefully. Yep. And to be fair, we've not had a dud yet, but it'll happen, I'm sure. But as so far, I've liked every movie we've done on that show.
I will count my blessings.
But that is us. Thank you very much for joining us. So check out the Atomic Cinema Experiment, the sci-fi movie podcast. It's the same duo. Both of us are on that. I also do a horror movie podcast called Screams After Midnight with Tim. Same YouTube channel or its own feed. It's called Streams After Midnight. Check out that. That's me, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies and the diplomatic community. That's what I say. Yeah. The ghost of the guy from Lethal Weapon 2 comes out of the Gozar hole and says, I have interdimensional immunity. Effed it up, damn it.
You nailed it.